Hello everyone, I am the Sleepy Joe, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I never imagined that a modest motel could become the backdrop for the most chilling night of my life. Yet, as I lie here in the darkness, attuned to the footsteps echoing outside my door, I come to understand how mistaken I was. It all began when my car broke down on the fringes of a small town I had never visited before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, I found myself in search of shelter for the night. It was then that I spotted the flickering neon sign of the Pinewood Motel, its vacancy light shining like a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Pulling into the parking lot, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The place appeared worn and weary, with peeling paint and weeds creeping through the cracks in the asphalt. Yet, in my desperation for a warm bed and a hot shower, I reminded myself that beggars can't be choosers. The bell above the office door chimed softly as I stepped inside. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and musty carpets, enveloping me like a heavy fog. Behind the counter stood a man, his appearance suggesting he had long since passed his prime. Greasy strands of hair framed a face etched with a permanent scowl. "Need a room?" I asked, attempting to project confidence that I didn't quite possess. His gaze swept over me, lingering just a moment too long, sending a shiver down my spine. "Just you?" he inquired, his voice rough and gravelly. I nodded, suddenly wishing for the comfort of company as he handed me a key, its metal cold against my palm. To a faded plastic tag, Room 17, he said, the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "Lucky you." As I walked to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. I glanced over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of curtains quickly closing in one of the other rooms. My skin prickled with unease. The room was about what I expected, small, musty, with furniture that had seen better decades. But it was a place to sleep, and that was all I needed. I dropped my bag on the bed and headed for the shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the lingering chill. As I washed away the tension, my shoulders relaxed, and the pipes groaned and sputtered before finally yielding a weak stream of lukewarm water. While rinsing my hair, a sound caught my attention. A faint creak, as if the door to my room had opened and closed. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned off the water, listening intently, hardly daring to breathe. Silence enveloped me. Cautiously, I peeked out of the bathroom, finding the room empty, just as I had left it. I must have imagined it, I reassured myself, though doubt lingered in the corners of my mind. I quickly dried off and dressed, the unsettling feeling still clinging to me like a shadow. As night descended, I found myself acutely aware that I was not alone. The motel seemed to awaken with a symphony of peculiar sounds. Footsteps echoed in the room above, pacing restlessly, while hushed voices floated in from the parking lot, too faint to discern but heavy with an unsettling energy. Every so often, a thump or a muffled cry would pierce the stillness, sending a shiver down my spine. In an attempt to distract myself, I turned on the television, but the ancient set offered only 2 channels, both plagued by static. I then reached for a dog-eared magazine tucked away in the nightstand, but the articles were hardly a comfort. Sleep felt elusive, a distant dream, yet I understood the necessity of rest to face the car troubles awaiting me in the morning. Just as I prepared to extinguish the light, a knock echoed through the stillness of the night. I paused, my hand hovering above the lamp switch, a chill creeping in. Who could it be at this hour? The knock came again, more urgent this time. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely breaking the silence, tinged with a hint of fear. No response, only another knock. My heart raced as I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I caught sight of a woman standing outside, seemingly ordinary, yet something in the air felt anything but normal. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a messy bun. Yet there was something in her eyes, a wild, desperate look that made me hesitate. "Please," she said, her voice muffled through the door. "I need help. Let me in." Every instinct screamed at me to keep the door closed. But what if she truly was in trouble? I undid the chain and opened the door just a crack. "What's wrong?" I asked, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of danger. The woman's eyes darted around nervously. "They're coming," she whispered. "We have to get out of here now." Before I could respond, she pushed past me into the room. I stumbled back, shocked by her sudden movement. She immediately went to the window, peeking out through the curtains. "Who's coming?" I demanded, fear and confusion battling for dominance in my mind. "What's going on?" She turned to me, her face pale in the dim light. "You don't know?" she asked, disbelief coloring her tone. "How long have you been here?" "I just checked in this evening," I said, growing more uneasy by the second. "My car broke down." The woman laughed. In the stillness of the night, a sound pierced the air, a harsh, humorless echo. "Oh, honey," she said, shaking her head. "That's how they get you. Your car didn't break down by accident." A chill crept down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, but before she could respond, her mouth fell silent. The heavy, deliberate footsteps outside grew louder, halting right at my door. "They're here," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. The doorknob began to turn slowly, and a wave of horror washed over me. In my confusion, I had forgotten to relock the door after letting her in. She grabbed my arm, pulling me closer. "Come on, quick!" she hissed, urgency lacing her words. We darted into the cramped bathroom, our breaths shallow and quiet, as the door to the room creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed ominously, accompanied by the unsettling sounds of drawers being yanked open and furniture scraping against the floor. "Where are they?" a gruff voice demanded, sending a chill down my spine. "Not here," another voice replied, the tension thickening in the air. "Check the next room." The footsteps faded, and the door clicked shut. I released a shaky breath, realizing I had been holding it in. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered to the woman beside me, who turned to me with a look that spoke volumes. With a finger pressed gently to her lips, she shook her head, and after a few moments of tense silence, her voice emerged, barely above a whisper. "This isn't just a motel," she said. "It's a trap. They lure in people who won't be missed." Her words trailed off as she swallowed hard. "And then what?" I pressed, though a part of me hesitated, unsure if I truly wanted to hear the answer. "They take them," she replied simply. "Sell them, kill them for sport, use them for God knows what. I've been trying to escape for weeks." My mind reeled, struggling to grasp the gravity of her words. It sounded so far-fetched, like something out of a dark tale. It felt as though we had stepped out of a horror movie, the fear evident in her eyes. The sounds I had heard, the peculiar behavior of the staff. It all began to weave together into a chilling tapestry. "We have to get out of here," I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. She nodded, her resolve matching mine. "There's a window in the back, behind the dumpsters. If we can reach it, we might stand a chance." Slowly and cautiously, we emerged from the bathroom. The room lay in disarray, drawers pulled out and the mattress overturned. They had searched thoroughly, but thankfully they hadn't thought to check the... In the stillness of the bathroom, we crept to the door, straining our ears for any hint of movement outside. Hearing nothing, we slipped into the night. The parking lot lay before us, shrouded in an unsettling quiet, the only sound being the faint buzz of the neon sign. We clung to the shadows, making our way around the edge of the building toward the back. Just as the dumpsters came into view, a shout pierced the silence behind us. "There they are!" In an instant, we ran, abandoning all thoughts of stealth. The heavy footsteps echoed behind us, gaining ground with alarming speed. The woman reached the window first, struggling to push it open. As I turned to glance behind us, three men emerged from the shadows, their faces contorted with fury. With a final effort, the window creaked open, and the woman scrambled through, reaching back to assist me. I was nearly through when a hand suddenly grasped my ankle. In a frantic struggle, I kicked out, my foot connecting with something solid. The grip loosened, and I tumbled through the window, landing on the ground outside. We dashed into the woods behind the motel, branches whipping against our faces as we plunged through the underbrush. The sounds of our pursuers echoed behind us, crashing through the trees, relentless in their chase. Behind us, the voices faded into the distance, growing softer as we moved away. After what felt like hours, we finally paused, breathless in the gentle pre-dawn light. Ahead, a road appeared, a sign of hope. As we approached, hoping to catch the attention of a passing car, the woman turned to me. "I'm Emily," she said, offering a weary smile. "Alice?" I replied, still grappling with the whirlwind of events. "Thank you, Alice," Emily said softly. "I couldn't have made it out alone." I nodded, words escaping me as the sun began to rise. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I felt a shiver of realization wash over me. I had come perilously close to never witnessing another dawn. Mountain View Motel faded into the distance behind us, yet I knew its horrors would linger in my dreams for years to come. The neon sign of Tony's Pizzeria flickered in the rearview mirror as I pulled away, the aroma of pepperoni and cheese filling my car. Little did I know, this routine delivery would lead me into a nightmare beyond my imagination. Sometimes the most terrifying journeys begin with the most innocent of intentions. Destinations: it was a slow Tuesday night, and I felt a sense of gratitude for the ping of the delivery app. Any extra cash was welcome, especially with rent approaching. The address was unfamiliar, located on the outskirts of town, where the streetlights flickered and the houses were few and far between. I hummed softly to the radio, my headlights slicing through the enveloping darkness as I navigated the winding country roads. The GPS instructed me to turn onto a narrow gravel driveway, barely discernible among the overgrown bushes. As I drove deeper into the night, a shiver of anticipation danced along my spine. As I ventured deeper into the property, the trees appeared to encircle me, their branches stretching out like twisted fingers. At last, I caught sight of a house, if one could even call it that. It resembled a dilapidated shack, its windows shrouded in darkness, and its paint peeling away like old memories. A solitary bulb flickered feebly above the front door, casting eerie shadows that danced across the porch. With the pizza box in hand, I stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly beneath my feet. The silence enveloped me, heavy and thick, interrupted only by the distant chirping of crickets and the haunting hoot of an owl. I inhaled deeply, attempting to dispel the unease that settled within me. A growing sense of unease settled over me as I knocked on the door, waiting for a response. Moments passed in silence, and just as I prepared to knock again, I heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, revealing a figure that seemed to have emerged from the depths of a horror tale. He was tall and gaunt, his wild, unkempt hair framing a face adorned with a scraggly beard. His sunken eyes, deep within their sockets, locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "A pizza delivery," I stammered, extending the box toward him. In that moment, his face split into a grin revealing yellow crooked teeth. "Yes, yes," he said, his voice raspy. Come in, I'll get your money." Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I reminded myself that I was just being paranoid. It was just an odd old man in a creepy house, nothing to be afraid of. I stepped inside and immediately regretted it. The smell hit me first, a musty sour odor that made my nose wrinkle. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered with stacks of newspapers and old furniture, creating a maze-like path through the room. "Just wait here," the man. As he slipped away into another room, I found myself standing in the entryway, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. My eyes wandered, absorbing the peculiar decor that surrounded me. Faded photographs adorned one wall, their subjects' eyes appearing to follow my every move. On a nearby table, something caught my attention and sent a chill down my spine. A collection of newspaper clippings detailing missing persons in the area. Just then, the man returned, but instead of the money I had anticipated, he held a gun. My heart raced, lodged firmly in my throat. As he aimed it at me, that unsettling grin still fixed on his face. "Now," he said. His tone was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "You're going to do exactly as I say." I raised my hand slowly, the pizza box falling to the floor with a dull thud. "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. Just take my wallet and let me go." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I don't want your money, boy. You're going to help me with something far more important." He gestured with the gun, directing me further into the house. I had no choice but to comply, my mind racing with possible escape routes. As I made my way through the kitchen, it was clear that time had forgotten this place. Pots and pans lay in a chaotic heap, a testament to years of neglect. I ventured into what seemed to be a study, where a large desk loomed, cluttered with papers and peculiar devices. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with ancient tomes and jars containing unidentifiable contents that I dared not scrutinize too closely. "Sit," the man commanded, gesturing toward a chair in the corner. I complied, my legs trembling beneath me. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of fear as it quavered in the stillness of the room. His eyes sparkled with an unsettling intensity. "You, my young friend, are going to assist me in seeking revenge," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "The owner of that pizza place, Joe, has ruined my life." He began to recount a long, winding tale of betrayal, claiming that Joe had cheated him out of his life savings, driven him to bankruptcy, and shattered his family. With each word, his agitation mounted, spittle flying from his lips as he waved the gun around. I listened, a chill creeping down my spine, realizing I was in the presence of someone who had completely lost their grip on reality. This was not merely a robbery that had taken a turn for the worse. It was the den of a man driven by a deep-seated grudge. He leaned in closer, and I could sense the foulness of his breath. "Joe needs to pay," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And you're going to help me make that happen." My throat felt parched with fear as I managed to ask, "How?" He flashed a grin, revealing teeth that seemed to gleam in the dim light. "You're going to call him," he instructed. "Tell him you've had car trouble and need him to come out here." Then, with a swift motion, he mimicked a slashing gesture across his throat. A wave of nausea washed over me. This maniac intended for me to lead my boss to his doom. "I can't do that," I stammered. "Please just let me go. I won't tell anyone about this, I swear." The man's face darkened. "You don't have a choice, boy. You'll do as I say, or you'll never leave this house alive." He shoved a phone into my trembling hands. With shaky fingers, I dialed Joe's number, praying he wouldn't answer. But after 3 rings, I heard his familiar voice. "Hello." I swallowed hard, the man's gun pressed against my temple. "Hey Joe, it's David. I've had some car trouble out on Old Mill Road. Could you come give me a hand?" There was a pause, and for a moment I thought Joe might refuse. But then he sighed, "All right, David. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Sit tight." The call ended, and the man snatched the phone away, cackling with glee. "Excellent, excellent," he crowed. "Now we wait." The next 20 minutes stretched out, feeling like an eternity. The man paced back and forth, muttering to himself, occasionally stopping to peer out the window. I sat frozen in the chair, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something, but with the gun trained on me, I felt trapped in a web of fear. Every movement felt like a distant dream as the sound of an approaching car drew near. The man's excitement was almost tangible, a whisper in the night. "It's time," he hissed, gripping my arm and pulling me to my feet. "Remember, one wrong move and you're dead." He guided me to the front door, positioning me so that I was visible while he remained concealed behind it. I heard the car doors slam, followed by footsteps crunching on the gravel. "David!" Joe's voice called out, breaking the stillness. "You out here, kid?" I opened my mouth, but no sound emerged. The man pressed the gun into my ribs, and with a shaky breath, I managed to croak, "Over here." As Joe drew near, the look of confusion etched on his face was unmistakable. He was a good man, always treating his employees with fairness. Whatever grudge this madman harbored against him seemed utterly unfounded. Just as Joe reached the porch, a sense of urgency washed over me, compelling me to act. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I pushed back, catching my captor off guard. We tumbled to the floor, limbs entwined, the gun skittering away across the wooden planks. "Run, Joe!" I shouted, struggling to keep the man pinned down. "Call the police." To his credit, Joe, with a swift motion, he grasped the gun, aiming it steadily at the man before him, though shock lingered on his face. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice steady. The man beneath him lay still, the fight seemingly drained from him now that he was disarmed. Great, heaving sobs escaped him, shaking his entire frame. Within moments, the police arrived, summoned by Joe's urgent call. As they led the man away in handcuffs, I found myself seated on the porch steps, my legs trembling beneath me. Joe settled beside me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked gently. He asked with concern, his features etched with worry. I nodded, though I knew it would be a long time before I felt truly okay. "Yeah," I said. "I just don't think I'll be making any more deliveries for a while." Joe chuckled, a welcome sound after the horrors of the night. "I think you've earned a nice long vacation and a raise." As we watched the police cars drive away, their red and blue lights fading into the distance, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The events of the night had shown me just how quickly an ordinary situation could turn. It was a night that unfolded into a nightmare, yet it revealed a strength within me, a resilience I had never known I possessed. I understood that the memory of this night would linger, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind closed doors. But as the first light of dawn began to brush the sky with soft hues, a glimmer of hope emerged. I had confronted my worst fear and emerged unscathed. Whatever lay ahead, I felt ready to face it. The pizza, long forgotten on the cold floor of that dreadful house, seemed insignificant now. As Joe and I drove back to town, I realized I had never truly been alone in this journey. Never have I felt such gratitude for a delivery gone awry. The snap of a twig beneath my boot resonated through the forest, sharp and startling, like a gunshot. I stood frozen, my heart racing in my chest. It was then that I caught sight of them, shadowy figures weaving between the trees. In that moment, I understood that my peaceful hike had transformed into a struggle for survival. What was meant to be a simple weekend escape had taken a turn. I had been feeling overwhelmed at work, and my therapist had gently encouraged me to immerse myself in nature, to reconnect with the earth, her voice calm and reassuring in my mind. It was a day that began beautifully, with the sun filtering through the canopy of evergreens, casting warm light upon the forest floor. The air was crisp and clean, infused with the scent of pine and damp earth. I found myself 3 hours into a hike in the Rocky Mountains, my backpack filled with trail mix and bottled water, and not another soul in sight, or so I thought. With each step, my worries seemed to melt away, the rhythm of my boots on the trail transforming into a kind of meditation. I had veered off the main path, drawn by an unseen whisper of adventure. About an hour ago, I was drawn by the sound of rushing water to a pristine stream, its clear water bubbling over smooth rocks. I paused to refill my water bottle, marveling at how clean and fresh it tasted compared to the tap water back home. That's when I heard it, voices carried on the wind, too faint to make out words but undeniably human. A twinge of disappointment washed over me. I had been savoring the solitude. Yet, I reminded myself that other hikers had just as much right to be here as I did. With a gentle sigh, I shouldered my pack and began to walk. Once more, I thought I might either catch up to the group ahead or find the trail to myself again. However, as I rounded a bend, something made me halt, frozen in place. In a small clearing just off the trail, I spotted a gathering of men. They were not hikers. Their dark clothing and the glint of weapons from this distance sent a chill down my spine. Surrounding them were crates, dozens of them. One crate stood open, revealing packages wrapped in brown paper. My mind struggled to comprehend the unsettling scene unfolding so deep in the woods. In the stillness of the night, I found myself far from any familiar path, surrounded by an unsettling sense of foreboding. Perhaps it was something illicit, drugs or weapons, I couldn't be sure. My heart raced as I realized I was witnessing something I was never meant to see. I took a cautious step back, hoping to quietly retreat and distance myself from the scene. But then, the snap of a twig beneath my foot shattered the silence, its sound reverberating through the forest like a warning. In that moment, time seemed to freeze as their gazes turned toward me, a shared shock hanging in the air. Then, as if breaking a spell, one of them shouted, and chaos erupted as they began to move. As I felt the presence behind me, I didn't pause to contemplate what might unfold. I turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush, disregarding the path or any sense of direction. My only focus was to create space between myself and those men. Their shouts echoed behind me, gradually fading yet never fully vanishing. My lungs burned, and branches lashed against my face, but fear propelled me onward. I lost track of time. It could have been mere minutes or perhaps hours, as the forest enveloped me in a green haze, blurring the world around me. At last, when my legs felt as though they might surrender beneath me, I caught sight of a thick thicket of bushes. Without a moment's hesitation, I plunged into its embrace, disregarding the thorns that clawed at my arms and face. There, I lay still, striving to calm my ragged breaths, straining my ears for any hint of pursuit. For what felt like an eternity, the only sound was the relentless thumping of my own heart. Then, faintly, I discerned voices in the distance. "He couldn't have gotten far," one voice growled, laced with anger. "Spread out," another replied. "He's got to be around here somewhere." I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, heart racing. Ground beneath me, I hardly dared to breathe. They were searching for me, and a sickening feeling settled in my stomach at the thought of what would happen if they found me. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of leaves underfoot. I closed my eyes, as if my blindness could somehow shield me from their gaze. "Check those bushes," a voice said, alarmingly near. I tensed, ready to bolt, though deep down I knew it was hopeless. I was trapped. Suddenly, a new sound sliced through the air, a loud electronic beeping. One of the men swore. "It's the perimeter alarm," he said. "Someone," another voice echoed in the stillness, urging urgency. "We need to get back and secure the product. This guy will have to wait." I listened as their footsteps faded, retreating swiftly from my hiding place. Even when silence enveloped me, I remained frozen, a statue of fear, afraid to stir as the adrenaline ebbed away. The weight of my predicament settled heavily upon me. I was lost in the woods, pursued by men whose intentions were anything but kind. The direction to safety was a mystery, and I couldn't tell how long I lay there, paralyzed by the chilling grip of dread. Indecision, the light began to fade, the forest growing darker around me. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but every snapping twig or rustling leaf sent a jolt of terror through me. Finally, as true darkness began to fall, I forced myself to move. My muscles protested as I crawled out of the thicket, thorns catching on my clothes and skin. I stood on shaky legs, trying to orient myself. The forest looked different in the twilight, shadows turning familiar shapes into looming monsters. I picked a direction that I hoped would lead me away from the clearing and began to walk, moving as quietly as I could. Every sound made me jump. An owl's hoot nearly sent me into a panic, convincing me for a moment that it was a human call. The crack of a branch in the distance had me diving for cover, only to realize it was probably just a deer or some other animal. I walked for what felt like hours, the darkness growing more complete. I was afraid to use my flashlight, worried it might attract attention. So I stumbled along by the faint light of the moon filtering through the trees. Just as I wandered through the shadows, a sense of despair began to creep in, convincing me I was merely treading the same path over and over. But then, in the distance, something caught my eye, a flicker of light that sent a thrill through my heart. It wasn't the harsh glare of flashlights. No, it was the warm glow of windows, a beacon of civilization. With renewed vigor, I quickened my pace, hope surging within me like a gentle breeze. As I drew nearer, the outlines of buildings emerged, a small cluster of cabins, perhaps a campground or a ranger station. Bursting forth from the tree line, I must have appeared quite the sight, with my tattered clothes and wild eyes. A couple seated by a campfire turned to me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. "Please," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper against the night. In the stillness of the night, a voice echoed through the trees, filled with urgency. "I need help," it pleaded. "There are men in the woods, dangerous men." The hours that followed felt like a dream, a blur of kindness from Christopher and Emily, who offered their phone to call for aid. They provided water and a warm blanket, their presence a comforting balm as we waited for the authorities. I recounted my tale to the park rangers, then to the police, who listened intently. They took my words to heart, swiftly organizing search parties to scour the darkened woods from which I had come. As dawn approached, the sky transformed, hues of pink unfurling like a promise of safety. As I stood there, the air thick with tension, a police officer approached me. "We found the clearing you described," he said, his voice steady. "There was evidence of recent activity, but whoever was there is long gone now. We'll keep investigating, but it looks like you stumbled onto a major drug operation." I nodded, too exhausted to feel much beyond a dull relief. The officer assured me they would need to ask more questions later, but for now I was free to go. Christopher and Emily offered to drive me back to my car, their kindness a warm light in the shadowy aftermath. As we drove down the winding road, the night wrapped around us, holding its secrets close. Mountain Road, I gazed out the window at the tranquil forest, transformed by the morning light into a scene of beauty and serenity, concealing no sinister intent. Yet, I was aware of the truth. I had glimpsed the shadows that could dwell in even the most idyllic settings. It would take a long while before I could view a forest with the same innocence again. My therapist had recommended nature as a remedy for my anxiety, but instead, it had bestowed upon me a fresh array of fears. Still, as we ventured further from the mountains, an unexpected sense of strength began to blossom within me. Within me, I had encountered true danger and emerged unscathed. Whatever challenges awaited me in my everyday life, I felt a newfound strength to confront them. The weekend getaway had not unfolded as I had envisioned, but as I approached my car and embarked on the long drive home, I recognized that it had transformed me in ways I had never expected. The forest had revealed both the shadowy and luminous facets of human nature, the perilous figures who had pursued me and the kind souls who had offered refuge. As the mountains faded from view in my rearview mirror, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not allow this experience to shatter my spirit. Rather, I would embrace it as a testament to my own resilience. The woods, while fraught with peril, had illuminated my inner strength, a realization that felt like the greatest gift of all. Yet, just as the comforting crackle of our campfire filled the air, it was abruptly overshadowed by a sound that sent chills down my spine, the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. As I turned, I beheld figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes glinting with malice. In that chilling moment, I understood that our family camping trip had transformed into a desperate struggle for survival. It was meant to be a perfect getaway. My wife, Emily, and I had been planning this trip for months. Our children, Ethan and Ava, were finally old enough to appreciate the great outdoors, and we were eager to share our love of nature with them. We chose a remote spot in the White Mountain, far from the crowded campgrounds and tourist traps. "It'll be an adventure," I told the kids, unaware of how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The first 2 days unfolded just as we had hoped. We hiked through lush forests and marveled at crystal clear streams. Clear streams flowed gently as we spent our evenings roasting marshmallows around the campfire. Ethan, at 12, was brimming with questions about the plants and animals we encountered, while 9-year-old Ava found joy in collecting pretty rocks and leaves. Emily and I exchanged contented smiles, feeling assured that we had made the right choice in unplugging from the world for a while. On the third day, we decided to venture further into the wilderness, having spotted a beautiful valley on our map, about a day's hike from our campsite. We packed enough supplies for an overnight stay. As we prepared to camp in the valley, the day had been filled with both challenges and rewards. The hike tested the kids, their complaints echoing through the trees, but soon transformed into gasps of awe as we arrived at our destination. The valley unfolded before us like a painting, a serene lake cradled by majestic pines and rugged rocks. We set up our camp near the water's edge, where Ethan and I cast our lines in search of fish, while Emily and Ava wandered off to discover the delicate wildflowers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around the flickering campfire, fatigue mingling with joy. It was then that the atmosphere shifted, and the night began to weave its own tale. The first sign that something was amiss was a rustling in the bushes, too heavy to belong to a small creature. I noticed Emily tense, her eyes darting along the tree line. Before I could utter a word, they emerged, 3 men stepping into the flickering firelight, and my heart skipped a beat. They were not fellow hikers or park rangers. These men appeared rough, with unkempt beards and tattered clothes. Yet it was their eyes that truly sent a chill down my spine, cold and hard, filled with a hostility that made my skin crawl. Well, the tallest one drawled, his voice low and unsettling. With a slight curl of his lips, a sneer formed as he surveyed the scene. It seemed we had some city folk encroaching upon our territory. I rose slowly, positioning myself protectively between the men and my family. "We didn't realize this area was off limits," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "We'll pack up and leave first thing in the morning." The man let out a harsh laugh, a sound that reverberated through the valley. "Oh, I don't think so. You've wandered into our neck of the woods, and we don't take kindly to outsiders." It was then that I heard the ominous click of the rifle and saw the glint of the barrel in the firelight. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. Emily had pulled the kids close to her, her face pale with fear. "Look," I said, holding my hands up in a placating gesture. "We don't want any trouble. We have some money, camping gear, it's all yours. Just let us go." The man with the rifle stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "It ain't about the money," he growled. "This is our land. It has been for generations, and we've got ways of dealing with trespassers." As the words hung in the air, a chill crept down my spine. It dawned on me, with a sense of growing dread, that these men had no plans of letting us go. They were playing with us, much like a cat might with its prey, savoring the moment before the inevitable. In that instant, a primal instinct surged within me. "Run!" I shouted, grasping the nearest object I could find, a burning log from the fire. I hurled it at the man with the rifle, sparks dancing in the night as it struck him. Chaos erupted around us. Emily quickly gathered Ava in her arms and dashed toward the trees, with Ethan close behind. Then, the sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the darkness, the bullets slicing through the air. Whizzing past my ear, I dove to the side, adrenaline surging through me as I scrambled to my feet and ran after my family. We plunged into the dark forest, branches whipping at our faces as we fled. I could hear the men crashing through the underbrush behind us, their angry shouts echoing through the trees. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror drove me forward. "This way," I gasped, veering off to the right. I had a vague idea of the terrain from our hike earlier, desperately trying to lead us towards rougher ground where we might lose them. As we navigated the shallow stream, the icy water sent a shiver through me. Ava's soft cries echoed in the night, her face hidden against Emily's shoulder. Ethan, though breathless and weary, pressed on, his determination etched on his features. The sounds of our pursuers seemed to wane, and a flicker of hope ignited within me. But then, a sudden yelp pierced the air. I turned to find Ethan on the ground, gripping his ankle. "I tripped," he whimpered, struggling to rise but collapsing again, a grimace of pain crossing his face. My heart sank. We couldn't leave him, but staying put wasn't an option. I could hear the men getting closer again, their voices carrying through the night air. "I'll carry him," I said to Emily. "You take Ava and keep going. There's a ravine about a half-mile ahead. Hide there and wait for us." Emily's eyes widened with fear. "John, no, we can't split up. We don't have a choice," I insisted, already lifting Ethan onto my back. "Go, we'll be right behind you." With one last anguished look, Emily turned and ran, Ava clinging to her. Like a lifeline, I adjusted Ethan's weight and set off as quickly as I could manage. My son's arms were wrapped tightly around my neck. We hadn't gone far when I heard a shout, much too close for comfort. There they are. A bullet splintered the trunk of a tree just inches from my head. I ducked and weaved, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Ethan buried his face in my shoulder, his body shaking with silent sobs. I spotted a dense thicket of bushes and made a split-second decision. "Hold on. Tight," I whispered to Ethan, then plunged into the undergrowth. The thorns tore at my clothes and skin, but I pressed on, burrowing as deep into the thicket as I could. We lay there, hardly daring to breathe, as the men's footsteps drew near. I could smell their sweat and hear their labored breathing as they passed just feet from our hiding spot. "Where'd they go?" one of them growled. "They can't have gotten far," another replied. The boy was limping. My arms tightened around Ethan, silently willing him to stay quiet. What felt like an eternity, we remained frozen, every snapping twig or rustling leaf sending a jolt of terror through me. Finally, mercifully, the men moved on, their voices fading into the distance. I waited several more minutes before cautiously emerging from our thorny sanctuary. "You okay, buddy?" I asked Ethan, brushing leaves from his hair. He nodded bravely, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "Dad, who are those men? Why are they chasing us?" I wish I had a good answer for him. "I don't know, son," I said honestly, "but we're going to be okay. We simply needed to locate Mom and Ava, and then we could leave this place." We resumed our journey, treading softly through the darkened forest. Each shadow appeared to conceal a lurking threat, and every sound hinted at potential danger. Yet, slowly, familiar landmarks from our earlier trek began to surface in my mind. We were nearing the ravine where I had instructed Emily to take cover. As we drew closer, a faint whisper reached my ears. "John, Ethan, A wave of relief washed over me as Emily and Ava stepped out from behind a large boulder. We embraced tightly, all of us trembling with a mix of emotions. There was a blend of fear and gratitude in the air as we found ourselves reunited. Yet the shadows of danger still loomed. Those men were still out there, and we were adrift in the wilderness, stripped of supplies and burdened with an injured child. Plan was essential. I recalled the ranger station, a mere 10 miles away, a beacon of hope in our minds. If we could reach it, safety would be within our grasp. The journey ahead felt daunting, especially given our fragile state. But as I gazed at my family, tired, frightened, yet alive and together, I understood that we had no choice. We had to try. With the first light of dawn beginning to break, we steeled ourselves for what lay ahead. Filtered through the trees, we ventured into the forest that had once seemed so inviting. Now it felt heavy and foreboding. Yet, with each step, we moved closer to safety and further from the nightmare that lingered behind us. Uncertainty clouded my mind. I didn't know if those men were still on our trail or what fate awaited us if they caught up. But one truth anchored my resolve. I would do whatever it took to protect my family. We had endured the night against all odds, and somehow we would find a way to survive this too. As I walked, a realization settled over me. This ordeal had transformed us. The carefree family that had ventured into these woods was no more. Instead, we had become something stronger, shaped by the crucible of fear and desperation. Whatever lay ahead, we would confront it together, holding tightly to hope and to one another. The moment I caught sight of his thumb protruding from the shadows, I understood I should have kept driving. Yet, something, perhaps pity, curiosity, or sheer folly, compelled me to slow down. Little did I know, I was about to embark on a chilling encounter. It had been a long day on the road, a journey back from a business trip. The monotony of the highway was occasionally interrupted by the flicker of headlights from oncoming traffic. The radio played softly, a mix of old rock songs and late-night talk shows, providing a comforting backdrop. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a solitary figure standing on the shoulder. He was tall and thin, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his thumb outstretched, the universal sign of a hitchhiker. I had passed countless hitchhikers in my life without a second thought. Thought lingered in the air, a sense of something unsettling. Perhaps it was the late hour or the isolation of our surroundings that made me hesitate. Whatever the cause, I found myself gently steering onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching softly beneath my tires as I came to a halt. The man approached my passenger window, and I cautiously rolled it down a crack. Up close, he appeared to be in his mid-30s, sporting a scruffy beard and intense eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Where you headed?" I asked, striving for a casual tone, though unease began to creep up my spine. "Just up the road a ways," he replied. His voice was surprisingly soft as he spoke. "My car broke down a few miles back. I just need to get to the next town." I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door lock. Every instinct urged me to drive away, to leave the stranger behind in my rearview mirror. Yet, the rational part of my mind argued that I was being paranoid. He was just a guy down on his luck, right? "Hop in," I said, unlocking the door. He slid into the passenger seat, his backpack nestled between his feet. As we pulled back onto the highway, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke lingered in the air, mingling with an unidentifiable scent. "I'm John," I said, more to fill the quiet than from any real urge to converse. "David," he replied, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. We traveled in silence for a stretch, the only sounds being the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. I found myself stealing glances at David, trying to decipher his mood. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles pale with tension. "So, what happened to your car?" I ventured, hoping to lighten the atmosphere. David shrugged, his voice flat. "Engine trouble," been having. For some time now, there had been troubles lingering in the air, a weight that pressed down on us. I felt a twinge of sympathy, knowing that at least relief awaited in the next town. He nodded, yet his silence deepened, wrapping around us like a thick fog, growing more uncomfortable with each passing moment. As we drove, a sign appeared, announcing that the next town was still 30 miles away. Suddenly, David broke the stillness, suggesting a detour to a rest stop ahead. He mentioned needing a bathroom break, and I found myself hesitating. The thought of stopping in the desolate stretch of road with a stranger sent a shiver down my spine. But refusing felt a touch paranoid and perhaps a bit rude, but I maintained a neutral tone as I replied, I could use some coffee anyway. A few minutes later, we arrived at the rest stop, which lay deserted before us. The vending machines and restrooms stood like islands of light amidst the surrounding darkness. As David stepped out of the car, I noticed him clutching his backpack tightly. An instinctive shiver ran down my spine. I'll just be a minute, he said, making his way toward the restrooms. I watched him disappear into the shadows before stepping out to stretch my legs, the cool night air a refreshing contrast to the warmth inside the car. In the stillness of the car, I made my way to the vending machines, my fingers searching for coins to trade for a warm cup of coffee. As I stood there, waiting for the familiar sound of the drink dispensing, an unsettling sensation crept over me. David had been absent for an unusually long time, far beyond what one might expect for a quick trip to the restroom. I cast a glance toward the restrooms, half hoping to see him step out, yet the door remained still, offering no reassurance. A mix of curiosity and unease stirred within me. A part of me longed to escape, to drive away and leave whatever was unfolding behind, while another part, the part that lingered in the shadows of my thoughts, urged me to stay and uncover the truth. Had made me stop in the first place, wouldn't let me leave without knowing. I approached the restroom cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the quiet night. David, I called out, everything okay in there? No response. I pushed open the door, the hinges creaking ominously. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange shadows. The stalls were empty. David was gone. My heart began to race. Had he run off? But why and where to in the middle of nowhere? That's when I saw it. A small piece of paper tucked under the soap dispenser. With trembling fingers, as I unfolded the note, my heart raced at the hurried scrawl. They're after me. I had to use you as cover. A chill coursed through me, and I dashed back to my car, fingers trembling as I fumbled for the keys. When the trunk finally popped open, I recoiled at the sight before me. Bundles of cash, stacks upon stacks, and beneath them, a gun. My mind spun with questions. What had I stumbled into? Who was David really, and who was pursuing him? The distant roar of engines jolted me back to the present, headlights piercing the darkness, drawing ever closer. Without a moment's thought, I knew I had to act. I closed the trunk with a firm thud and settled into the driver's seat. The tires let out a sharp squeal as I sped away from the rest stop, my heart racing in rhythm with the pounding in my ears. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed two black SUVs entering the rest area. They lingered for just a moment before continuing their chase. I pressed the accelerator down, the engine growling as I urged it to go faster. The speedometer climbed past 90, then 100, yet the SUVs remained close behind. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles turning white as I maneuvered through traffic, narrowly escaping collisions, each moment thick with tension. Thoughts raced through my mind. Was David some kind of criminal, a thief, or was he fleeing from something more sinister? What would happen to me if these people caught up? I took an exit ramp at the last second, hoping to lose my pursuers, but they were relentless, matching my every move. I found myself on a winding back road, trees looming on either side, the SUVs gaining on me, their headlights filling my mirrors. Suddenly, A figure appeared in the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing as I fought for control, skidding to a stop. Suddenly, I was jolted into awareness as David rushed to the car, flinging open the passenger door. "Drive!" he shouted, leaping inside. For just a heartbeat, I hesitated, but the shrill sound of screeching tires behind us propelled me into action. I pressed the accelerator, the tires spinning wildly on the asphalt before finally gripping the road. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. David was busy rummaging through his backpack, and with a practiced ease, he pulled out another gun, checking it meticulously. "I'm CIA," he said, his eyes darting nervously to the road behind us. "Deep cover. Those guys back." They were not the good guys, and my mind struggled to process this unsettling truth. "The money in my trunk was evidence," he replied grimly, "enough to bring down a major criminal organization. But they discovered I was onto them, and I had been running ever since." The SUVs were closing in again, and I heard the crack of gunfire as my rear window shattered in a shower of glass. David leaned out the window, returning fire. "There's a safe house about 10 miles from here," David shouted over the chaos. "If we can make it there, we'll be okay." I nodded, too focused on the unfolding danger. As we drove, the words we sought seemed to dance just out of reach, while the car's suspension protested with each sharp turn. The gunfire echoed around us, a relentless symphony of chaos. Just as we rounded a bend, a glimmer of hope appeared, a bridge stretching over a deep ravine. On the far side, shrouded in darkness, lay the promise of safety, a cluster of buildings that beckoned us closer. "Don't stop for anything," David urged, urgency lacing his voice. We were halfway across when a thunderous explosion erupted behind us. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of one of the SUVs flipping, consumed by flames, while the other swerved wildly, a frantic dance of survival. We narrowly avoided crashing into the guardrail, finally skidding to a stop in front of a nondescript building. David was out of the car in an instant, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. Armed men emerged from the building, quickly surrounding us. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had just transpired hit me like a truck. I sat there, hands still gripping the steering wheel, while David spoke urgently with the other agents. Eventually, he returned to the car. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd heard it all night. I nodded. With a sense of bewilderment, I pondered what lay ahead. "Now you're a hero," he remarked, a faint smile gracing his lips. "You helped dismantle a significant criminal operation, but for your safety, we must keep you here for a while, just until we tie up all the loose ends." As I followed Davide into the building, my thoughts swirled in confusion. In just a few hours, my life had been completely transformed. I had gone from an ordinary businessman to an unsuspecting participant in an international sting operation. The door closed behind us, shutting out the tumult of the world beyond. I felt an unusual sense of tranquility as I confronted the specter of death, knowing I would emerge on the other side, ready to face whatever awaited me. After all, I had already endured the wildest ride of my life. The moment that blue minivan passed my house for the third time, a chill crept over me, signaling that something was amiss. Little did I know, my search for a secondhand stroller would draw me into a chilling game of cat and mouse. It all began innocently enough. I had just welcomed my daughter Emma into the world, and like many new parents, I was navigating the complexities of this new chapter. As the days passed, the financial strain of diapers, formula, and all the other baby essentials crept into my budget, more swiftly than I had expected. When the time came to find a stroller, I turned to Craigslist, hoping to uncover a hidden gem among the listings. After sifting through numerous options, I stumbled upon what appeared to be the perfect find. A high-end stroller, gently used and offered at a fraction of its retail price. The seller, a woman named Susan, lived just a few neighborhoods away, and we arranged to meet at her apartment the following day. Her place was situated in an unfamiliar part of town, adding a hint of uncertainty to my journey. As I approached the older, somewhat run-down buildings, I reminded myself to reserve judgment. The creaky stairs led me to her third-floor apartment, and I instinctively hugged Emma closer to my chest, a flicker of unease passing through me. However, Susan turned out to be a perfectly pleasant surprise. A smiling woman in her mid-30s, her kind eyes and soft voice immediately putting me at ease. She cooed over Emma while showcasing the stroller, which was indeed in excellent condition. "I'm just glad it's going to a good home," Susan said, as I counted out the cash, reflecting on how quickly my daughter had outgrown it. We chatted for a while, the atmosphere light and warm. A moment shared about the joys and challenges of motherhood lingered in the air before I departed. She handed me a bag of baby clothes, remnants of her daughter's growth, and I left with a sense of having not only found a treasure, but perhaps a new friend in this journey of motherhood. That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Susan. "Hope you got home safely. Enjoy the stroller." It struck me as a kind gesture, albeit a touch unnecessary. I replied with a quick thank you, dismissing it from my mind. Yet, in the days that followed, I began to notice small things, subtle shifts in the fabric of my daily life, at first easy to overlook. As I stood in the front yard, gently pushing Emma in her new stroller, a blue minivan caught my eye. It glided past on a Tuesday afternoon, the driver, a man I didn't recognize, appearing to gaze intently in my direction. Earlier, I had dismissed a car that resembled Susan's parked down the street, and I had caught a fleeting glimpse of someone who looked like her at the grocery store, vanishing down another aisle. I tried to reassure myself, attributing these unsettling thoughts to a lack of sleep and the anxieties of new motherhood. Yet, the presence of that minivan lingered in my mind, weaving a thread of unease through the fabric of my day. A chill ran down my spine as it approached us, but I dismissed it as mere coincidence. An hour later, it passed by again, and this time, I felt certain the driver was watching us. When it circled back for a third time, my heart raced, and I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I shared my concerns with my husband, Mark. "I think someone's watching us," I admitted, feeling a bit foolish as the words escaped my lips. Mark listened with patience, though I could sense the skepticism in his eyes. "Honey, you're exhausted," he replied gently. Gently, I reassured myself that my mind was likely just playing tricks. Why would anyone be watching us? I wanted to believe him, but the next day, as I returned from a walk with Emma, I spotted Susan. She stood across the street, partially concealed behind a tree, her gaze fixed on my house. The moment our eyes met, she hurriedly walked away. A chill settled in my stomach. Something felt amiss. I called the non-emergency police line, but they offered little assistance. Without concrete evidence of a threat, their hands were tied. They suggested I keep a record of any suspicious activity. As the days passed, I found myself caught in a web of unease. Each night, I would hear the whispers of the wind, and the shadows seemed to dance just beyond my view. The blue minivan continued to appear, a ghostly reminder of Susan's presence. Once, a message arrived from an unknown number, chilling in its simplicity. "Your baby is beautiful. Her eyes are so bright." My heart raced, and I became a prisoner in my own home, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. I took to checking the locks on our doors and windows with a fervor, each click echoing my growing anxiety. Mark, ever the voice of reason, suggested I seek help for my postpartum worries, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. It felt as though unseen eyes were upon me, always watching, always waiting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone in the dark. On a rainy Thursday night, Mark was working late, leaving me home alone with Emma. As I washed the dishes, a noise from the baby monitor caught my attention. A creak that didn't sound like Emma stirring in her crib. My heart raced as I crept upstairs. Approaching the nursery, I heard whispers. Peering around the door frame, I was met with a sight that chilled me to the bone. There stood Susan, leaning over Emma's crib, reaching for my baby. Without a moment's hesitation, I burst into the room, my voice trembling as I screamed, "Get away from her!" Susan whirled around. Her eyes were wide with shock, and for a moment, we simply stared at one another, the only sound being Emma's confused whimpers. "I'm sorry," Susan said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I had to see her, to hold her." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, stepping to stand between her and the crib. "Why are you in my house? Why have you been following me?" Tears welled up in Susan's eyes. "My baby," she whispered. "I lost my baby. She looks so much like your Emma. I couldn't let go." The pieces began to fall into place, the stroller that was barely used. As I observed Susan's fixation on my daughter, a wave of pity washed over me, swiftly replaced by a creeping sense of fear and anger. "You need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "Before I call the police." Susan nodded, tears streaming down her face. As she turned to go, she cast one last glance at Emma, the longing in her eyes a painful sight. Yet I stood firm. After she departed, I contacted the police. They arrived, took my statement, and assured me they would look into Susan, advising her to maintain her distance. They also recommended that I consider a restraining order for added safety. In the days that followed, I delved deeper into Susan's story. She had indeed lost a baby just a few months prior, and the weight of her grief seemed to have drawn her into an obsession with Emma, seeking solace in the idea of a replacement. The man in the blue minivan revealed himself to be her brother, concerned for her well-being and keeping a watchful eye on her fragile state of mind. It took a considerable time for me to regain my sense of safety. We decided to install a security system, and I sought therapy to navigate the anxiety that had taken root within me. Slowly, life began to resemble something familiar again, yet the echoes of that unsettling experience lingered in my memory. There was a lesson I learned, one that lingers in the quiet corners of my mind. Sometimes the greatest dangers can emerge from the most unexpected places. A simple act of kindness, like selling a used stroller to a fellow mom, can unwittingly open the door to a nightmare. Years have passed, yet I still think of Susan from time to time. I hope she found the help she needed. Though I tread more cautiously now, I strive not to let fear govern my life. After all, Emma is growing up swiftly, and I wish to savor every moment without the shadow of worry creeping in as I watch her play in our yard. In the backyard, her laughter dances through the warm summer air, a sweet reminder of life's delicate beauty. I find myself filled with gratitude, not only for her safety but for the resilience I discovered within during those harrowing days. This strength remains with me, ever prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. The moment I saw Nurse Samantha slip those vials into her purse, an unsettling feeling settled in my gut. I knew then that I was in for the longest night shift of my life, unaware that it would also become the most perilous. My name is David, and I have been working as a janitor at Mercy General Hospital for nearly a year. My job isn't glamorous, but it keeps the bills paid. Most nights, the atmosphere is calm and quiet. I go about my rounds, mopping the floors, emptying the trash, and ensuring everything is tidy for the day shift. Nothing too exciting, that is, until a Tuesday night in October. I remember it well, for the air was unseasonably cold, and I had forgotten my jacket at home. Shivering, I pushed my cart down the dimly lit corridors of the third floor, the wheels squeaking softly with each turn. At the stroke of 3 in the morning, it was during one of those quiet nights that I first sensed something unusual about Nurse Samantha, a familiar face during the night shift. She had always carried an air of intensity, a formidable presence known for her fiery temperament, and most of the staff tended to steer clear of her. But this night felt different. I noticed her casting furtive glances, her eyes darting over her shoulder as she struggled with the lock on the supply closet. My curiosity piqued. I quietly maneuvered my cart closer, feigning deep interest in my tasks. As I wiped down the handrail, a chill crept over me at what I witnessed next. Samantha, with a careful hand, opened the clock closet and began to remove vials of medication, stashing them away in her bag. This was no mere act of grabbing an extra Band-Aid or some gauze. These were serious drugs, the kind that are kept under lock and key. I found myself frozen, caught in a web of uncertainty. A part of me urged to confront her right then and there, but another part, the one that whispered of self-preservation, advised silence. Samantha was a formidable presence, and I had witnessed her temper flare before. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken tension. In the dimly lit corridors, a sense of unease settled over me as I watched Samantha. She glided from room to room, her movements smooth and practiced, administering medications with an air of normalcy. Yet, every so often, when she believed the shadows concealed her, a furtive motion would reveal a secret, something slipping into her pocket or purse. As the hours stretched on, my heart raced with the weight of what I had witnessed. The lives of patients hung in the balance, and yet, the thought of confronting her sent a chill down my spine. How could I unveil the truth without inviting danger into my own life? The night deepened, and the tension thickened, leaving me to ponder the shadows that danced around us both. 4 o'clock in the morning. I saw my chance as Samantha slipped into the supply closet once more. This time, I positioned myself nearby, pretending to mop the floor. When she emerged, I noticed her bag was bulging, the outline of vials visible through the fabric. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and decided to confront her. "Samantha," I said quietly, striving to keep my voice steady, "I saw what you were doing in the supply closet." She froze, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto mine. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "I saw you taking medication," I replied, fighting to maintain my composure. "Keep my voice low," I warned, as the weight of the moment settled around us. Her face flushed with anger, and before I could fully comprehend, she lunged, gripping the collar of my uniform. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed, her face mere inches from mine. "Mind your own business." The air was thick with tension, suffocating and electric. Samantha was a force of unpredictability, and I knew I had to tread carefully. "I'm not going to let this go," I stated firmly, feeling her grip tighten. For a fleeting moment, I feared what she might do next. She struck me, but then released her grip, pushing me backward. I stumbled, barely managing to keep my balance. "If you say anything," she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret it." With that, she stormed away, leaving me feeling shaken and uncertain about my next steps. I knew I couldn't simply let this go, yet the fear of what Samantha might do if I reported her loomed over me. For the next hour, I went about my duties in a daze, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting Samantha to leap out at me. My mind raced with unsettling possibilities. What if she trapped me in a secluded area? In the dim light of the janitorial closet, as the shadows lengthened with the approach of dawn, a weight settled heavily upon my heart. I found myself at a crossroads, torn between silence and the haunting thought of what could happen if I remained quiet. The specter of a patient receiving the wrong medication loomed large, a chilling possibility born from Nurse Samantha's actions. With hands that trembled like leaves in a gentle breeze, I reached for the phone, the cold plastic grounding me in the moment. I dialed the emergency line, my heart racing as I awaited a response. To my relief, Dr. Patel, a senior physician known for his calm demeanor, answered. "Dr. Patel?" I whispered, my voice barely escaping the confines of my throat. "I need to report something." It's about Nurse Samantha. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. As I stood there, the weight of my discovery pressed heavily upon me. Stealing medication from the supply closet, I had said, and there was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Patel's voice came through, grave and steady. That's a serious accusation. David, are you sure about this? I recounted the details, my voice gaining strength with each word. Dr. Patel listened closely, his questions sharp and precise. All right, David, he finally said. You did the right thing by reporting this. Stay where you are. I'm coming down there now, and we'll handle this together. The minutes that followed stretched endlessly, each sound echoing in the silence, making my heart race with anticipation. As I stood there, my heart racing, I was certain it was Samantha who had come to face me. When Dr. Patel finally arrived, flanked by 2 security guards, a wave of relief washed over me. We found Samantha in the break room, her face pale as she caught sight of us. Samantha, Dr. Patel said, his tone steady yet gentle, we need to talk about some missing medication. What unfolded next felt like a dream, a blur of movement. Samantha attempted to flee, but the guards swiftly blocked her escape. As they restrained her, her bag tumbled to the ground, spilling forth a cascade of vials, each one a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Syringes lay scattered, the evidence unmistakable. Samantha crumbled, her emotions a tempest of sobs and fierce threats as the security guards escorted her away. Dr. Patel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did a brave thing, David, he said. You may have saved lives today. In the days that followed, the full scope of Samantha's actions emerged. She had been pilfering drugs for months, peddling them on the streets to sustain her own addiction. The hospital tightened its security protocols, and I received commendations for my courage, yet the experience lingered, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. For weeks, I felt the weight of shadows lurking around me, each flicker of movement sending a shiver down my spine. I was convinced that Samantha or one of her associates might come seeking revenge. The thought of quitting crossed my mind, dreaming of a job where the most perilous encounter would be a slippery floor. Yet, Dr. Patel's words echoed in my mind. I had made a difference, potentially saving lives. That realization ignited a spark of courage within me. Now, months later, I find myself still working the night shift at St. Andrews. The halls are quiet once more, but I approach my duties with a renewed sense of purpose. I am not merely maintaining the floors. I am part of something greater. As I navigate the quiet corridors, I remain watchful, aware of the vital lessons learned during that night in the hospital. Each role, from the skilled surgeons to the diligent janitors, weaves together a tapestry of care, all dedicated to the sacred task of preserving life and ensuring safety. There are moments when courage must rise, even in the face of fear. The soft squeak of my cart echoes in the stillness, a gentle reminder of my purpose. I am more than just a janitor. I am a guardian, a steadfast protector of this sanctuary of healing. Should another Samantha ever appear, I will be prepared. The night shift can stretch long and sometimes it feels perilous. Yet it is my duty, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. The instant I noticed the envelope slide beneath my hotel room door, my heart froze. In an unfamiliar land, devoid of money or identification, a creeping sensation of being pursued enveloped me. That seemingly innocuous piece of paper felt as if it were a ticking bomb. I had always envisioned exploring the world, and now, after saving diligently, I found myself in this unsettling predicament. A solo trip to Greece felt like the beginning of an extraordinary adventure. Little did I know, it would soon transform into a night that would challenge every bit of my strength and cleverness. The initial days in Athens were a dream come true. I wandered through the Acropolis, indulged in delicious Greek dishes, and became enchanted by the lively streets of Plaka. The city enveloped me in a delightful sensory experience, and I found myself captivated by its rich tapestry of ancient history intertwined with modern vibrancy. On my fourth night, I returned to my modest hotel room, weary yet filled with anticipation. As the day of exploration faded into the quiet of the night, I prepared for rest, only to sense an unsettling shift in my surroundings. My bag, which I had confidently placed on the chair, now lay on the floor, its presence a whisper of something amiss. Initially, I dismissed it, attributing the change to a fleeting lapse in memory. Yet, as I peered inside, a chill coursed through me. My wallet, passport, and phone had vanished. A wave of panic washed over me, for I found myself alone in a foreign land, stripped of my identity and means to seek help. With trembling hands, I hurried to the hotel reception, my heart racing as I recounted the unsettling turn of events. The receptionist's expression shifted to one of concern as she swiftly dialed for assistance. The local police arrived, their expressions revealing a sense of resignation as they took my statement. They explained that thefts like mine were all too common, especially in tourist areas. With a heavy heart, they advised me to visit the American Embassy in the morning to secure a temporary passport. That night stretched on, each tick of the clock amplifying my unease. I barely slept, startled by every creak in the hallway, haunted by the thought that the thief might return. When dawn finally broke, I made my way to the embassy, my nerves frayed and my spirit dimmed, ready to face whatever awaited me there. Were sympathetic yet bound by their procedures. They gathered my information and informed me it would take a few days to sort everything out. In the meantime, they offered me some emergency cash and assisted me in locating a more affordable hostel for my stay. As I adjusted to my new, simpler surroundings, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. It wasn't merely the theft that troubled me. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface. I found myself noticing fleeting shadows of individuals observing me. A man in a dark suit seated at a cafe across the street. A woman who, as I wandered through the bustling market, an unsettling feeling crept over me, as if shadows were trailing my every step. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks, a product of the mounting stress that had enveloped me. Yet, upon returning to my room after yet another day of anxious waiting for news from the embassy, I found it, a plain white envelope lying innocently on the floor. My heart raced as I approached it, the sight of it both mundane and menacing. With trembling hands, I picked it up and opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper adorned with a hasty scrawl, "Stay away. This is your only warning." My blood ran cold as I pondered the meaning behind it all. Who was warning me and what should I stay away from? I called the front desk, my voice trembling as I explained the mysterious envelope. They assured me they would take it seriously and increase security measures that night. As darkness enveloped the hostel, I barely slept. Every creak of the old building sent shivers down my spine. I imagined footsteps outside my door, shadows dancing under the crack. When morning finally arrived, I was a wreck. I realized I couldn't remain in my room, feeling like a sitting duck. I needed to be among others, seeking a sense of safety in their presence. So I ventured out. As I made my way to the lobby, I settled into a worn armchair, feigning interest in a book while my eyes darted to every newcomer. It was then that I noticed a man observing me. He was middle-aged, his salt and pepper hair framing a face that bore the marks of too much sun. When our eyes met, he approached me, his thick accent wrapping around his words. I nodded, a sense of unease creeping in, my body instinctively tensing. Leaning in closer, he whispered, his voice barely audible, "You're in danger. They think you have something that belonged to them." Before I could inquire about their identity or their thoughts on my presence, he vanished, blending into the throng beyond the hostel doors. My thoughts spiraled. Was this linked to the theft? Had I unwittingly wandered into a web far more intricate than a mere robbery? It felt as though I had stepped into the pages of a spy thriller, yet the reality was chillingly palpable. The remainder of my day unfolded in a haze of heightened awareness, each passerby morphing into a potential danger. I couldn't dispel the unsettling sensation that I was being watched. As the shadows deepened and the night wrapped itself around the city, an unsettling feeling crept in. The familiar comfort of my room had vanished, replaced by an eerie sense of vulnerability. I wandered the streets of Athens, seeking refuge in the glow of 24-hour cafes, never lingering too long in one spot. What once felt like a magical place now bore an air of menace. Around midnight, I caught sight of them, two figures cloaked in darkness, moving with a determined grace through the dwindling crowd. Their eyes scanned the faces around them, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized they were searching for me. In a moment of instinct, I slipped into a narrow alleyway, my heart racing with the weight of the night's tension. It was loud, and I was certain they would hear it. I could hear their footsteps at the entrance of the alley. "She must have gone this way," one of them said, his English laced with a Greek accent. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. They were so close that I could smell the cigarette smoke clinging to their clothes. Just when I thought they would discover me, a cat knocked over a trash can further down the alley. The noise startled them, and they moved past my hiding spot to investigate. I didn't wait to see if they would come back. As soon as they were out of sight, I made my escape. In the stillness of the night, I found myself running, propelled by an instinctual urge to escape. There was no destination, just the rhythm of my breath and the pounding of my heart. I pushed myself until my lungs ached and my legs felt like they might give way beneath me. When I finally paused to gather my breath, I discovered the ancient agora before me, its ruins bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. It stood there, a silent testament to a civilization that had faced trials far beyond my own. That thought, oddly comforting, infused me with a quiet strength. As the night wore on, I moved cautiously from shadow to shadow, ever vigilant, until the first light of dawn beckoned me back toward the American embassy. I found myself in a situation where trust was a fragile thing, yet I had no other options. To my astonishment, a figure awaited me, a man with salt and pepper hair, familiar from the hostel. He revealed a badge, identifying himself as an Interpol agent. "We've been watching you," he said, his voice gentler than I had anticipated. "You unknowingly checked into a hotel that serves as a front for a significant counterfeiting operation. They believed you were one of us." A wave of relief washed over me as the pieces fell into place. I was not losing my mind after all. Paranoia lingered. The danger had indeed felt tangible. The following days unfolded like a tempest. I provided statements to Interpol and the local police. My stolen belongings were retrieved, though the cash remained elusive. The Interpol agent, a man named Dmitri, revealed that the theft was a common ploy to silence tourists regarding what they might have witnessed at the hotel. As I finally stepped onto my flight home, a swirl of emotions enveloped me. Relief washed over me for my safety, yet an unexpected exhilaration coursed through my veins. I had confronted my deepest fears and emerged unscathed, all while navigating the solitude of a foreign land. Hunted and afraid, I had traversed through Greece, yet the land I was departing was not the same as the one I had arrived to explore. The romantic notions of ancient ruins and Mediterranean beaches had faded, replaced by a grittier, more complex reality. However, I was leaving with something far more precious than mere tourist snapshots. I carried with me a newfound confidence in my own resilience. As the plane ascended, I gazed out at the twinkling lights of Athens below, aware that somewhere down there, life continued as usual, with tourists wandering the Acropolis. As the locals savored their late-night souvlaki, perhaps some shadows were scheming their next moves. Yet, I found myself transformed. I had glimpsed the darker corners of travel and emerged unscathed. Whatever trials awaited me in my everyday life back home, I felt a quiet confidence. After all, could they truly be more daunting than being pursued through the winding streets of an unfamiliar city? As the green hues of the night faded into the distance, a smile crept across my face. This journey may not have unfolded as I had envisioned, but it would linger in my memory forever. And isn't that, in the end, the essence of travel? It was in that dim flicker of lamplight that I first met his gaze, and a chill ran down my spine. In that instant, I realized the grave error I had made. The man I had pulled from the tumultuous sea was not merely a victim of nature's wrath. He was the very essence of the storm itself. I had unwittingly welcomed chaos into my tranquil haven. For nearly 20 years, I have been the keeper of the Moore Point Lighthouse, embracing the solitude that comes with it. The rhythmic pulse of the beacon, the relentless crash of waves against the rugged shore, and the haunting cries of seagulls have been my steadfast companions through countless storms. From my vantage point high above the ocean, I often found solace within these sturdy stone walls, a sanctuary against the tempest outside. Yet nothing could have braced me for that particular night. The storm had been relentless, one of the fiercest I had witnessed in years. The wind howled like a banshee, rain lashed against the windows, and lightning cleaved the sky in jagged bursts. I was stationed in the lantern room, ensuring the light remained steadfast and true, when I caught sight of him. At first, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. Surely, no one could be out in that maelstrom. But there he stood. There was a lone figure clinging to a piece of driftwood, tossed about by the angry waves like a rag doll. My training kicked in immediately. I radioed the Coast Guard, but they were swamped with other emergencies and couldn't reach us for hours. I knew that by then it would be too late. I've always prided myself on being a decent man, the kind who'd help a stranger in need. So I did what any good lighthouse keeper would do. I went out to save him. The journey from the lighthouse to the shore was treacherous, the wind howling around me. The shore, where the relentless waves crashed around us. The rain poured down, obscuring my vision and making each step feel like a challenge. Yet, there I stood at the water's edge, the icy waves lapping at my chest, a constant reminder of the danger lurking beneath. The man, weary and adrift, had drawn closer, his strength waning. With a surge of adrenaline coursing through me, I reached out, grasping him firmly and pulling him onto the sand. He was a pitiful sight, drenched and trembling, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. I steadied him, offering my support as we made our way back, each step a testament to our survival against the storm's fury. As I settled him by the fire, I wrapped him in blankets and pressed a mug of hot tea into his trembling hands. It was only then, in the warm glow of the hearth, that I truly observed him. He was younger than I had initially assumed, likely in his early 30s. His face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that seemed to flicker with an inner flame. There was something disquieting about those eyes, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspy from the salt water. I found myself in a moment of stillness, the air thick with an unspoken tension. "What happened out there?" I inquired gently, watching as he lowered his gaze to his mug, a fleeting shadow crossing his features. "My boat capsized," he murmured. "I was the only survivor." I nodded, offering a sympathetic ear, yet a whisper of doubt lingered in my mind. His attire spoke of land, not the sea, and there were no signs of a sailor's life. No life jacket, no tags to identify him. "I'm John," I introduced myself, attempting to dispel the unease that clung to the air. "I'm the lighthouse keeper here." He met my gaze, his unsettling eyes piercing through the dim light. "Martin," he replied, a name that hung in the air like a warning. As the night deepened, Martin's words flowed more freely. He inquired about the lighthouse, my life within its walls, and the mysteries of the surrounding landscape. His curiosity appeared harmless, yet there was a fervor in his questions that sent a shiver down my spine. I attempted to reach the Coast Guard once more, but the storm's wrath disrupted the signal, leaving us isolated until dawn. While I arranged a makeshift bed for Martin in the living quarters, an unsettling thought lingered in my mind. Had I erred in inviting him here? Yet what choice did I truly have? How could I have left him to drown? I guided Martin to his room and then retreated to my own, locking the door behind me. A precaution I had never felt the need to take before. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind swirling with doubts and fears. Eventually, I must have dozed off, for I awoke with a start to the sound of movement outside my door. The storm had subsided, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. I glanced at my surroundings. It was 3:27 a.m., the hour when shadows stretch and the world outside falls silent. In the stillness of the night, I rose quietly, pressing my ear against the door. Footsteps echoed softly down the hallway, and I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps halted just outside my door for a fleeting moment before continuing on, sending my heart racing. With a cautious hand, I cracked open the door and peered into the dim glow of the emergency lights. There, I caught sight of Martin's figure, slipping around the corner toward the lantern room. I followed, careful to keep my own footsteps as silent as the shadows that surrounded me. As I reached the top of the metal stairs, I heard Martin's voice, urgent and low, as he spoke to someone unseen. Low, I heard him say, "The old fool bought my story hook, line, and sinker. We can move forward with the plan." A chill ran through me. Who was he talking to? What plan? I must have made a noise because suddenly Martin fell silent. I barely had time to duck back down the stairs before he emerged from the lantern room. "John?" he called out. "Is that you?" I didn't answer, my mind racing. I needed to reach my radio to call for help, but to do that, I would have to get past Martin. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into view. "Just checking on you," I said. "I thought I heard something up here," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. Martin's face wore a mask of innocence, yet his eyes, those burning eyes, whispered a different tale. "Just admiring the view," he said smoothly. "It's quite something up here." I nodded, unable to trust my voice any further. We lingered in an uncomfortable silence for a moment before I excused myself, claiming I needed to check on something downstairs. As soon as I was out of sight, I hurried to the radio room, my hand trembling as I attempted to establish a connection. With a sense of urgency, I whispered into the mic, "Mayday, Mayday. This is Cape Elizabeth Light. I need immediate assistance." Just then, a hand clamped down on my shoulder, spinning me around. There stood Martin, all pretense of friendliness stripped away, his face now a mask of cold determination. "Now, John," he said, his voice sharp and unyielding. "We can't have you doing that." What followed was a desperate struggle. Despite my age, I still possessed the strength forged from years of maintaining the lighthouse, but Martin was younger, quicker, and fueled by a frantic energy I couldn't match. In the dimly lit room, chaos erupted as we collided, sending equipment and furniture tumbling in our wake. I found my mark, landing a solid punch to his jaw, but the reprisal was swift. He slammed my head against the wall, leaving me momentarily disoriented. Through the haze of pain, I caught sight of Martin, his hand gripping a heavy wrench from my toolbox, raised high with a look of grim determination etched on his face. "I'm sorry it had to come to this, old man," he declared, his voice steady. "But I can't let you interfere." Just as he was about to bring the wrench crashing down, a blinding light flooded the room, and we both turned in its direction, startled by the sudden illumination. Outside the window, a guard helicopter hovered, its searchlight piercing the darkness and illuminating our hiding place. In that fleeting moment of distraction, I seized my chance. I lunged forward, tackling Martin to the ground. We wrestled on the floor, the sound of shouts and heavy footsteps echoing up the lighthouse stairs. Moments later, the room erupted with Coast Guard officers, swiftly pulling Martin off me and restraining him as they led him away. It was then that I uncovered the chilling truth. Martin was entangled in a smuggling ring, using these remote lighthouses as clandestine drop-off points, with plans that threatened to engulf Marrow in darkness. For months, they had chosen this isolated spot for their operations, believing it to be perfect. The storm that had brought Martin to my door was no accident. It was a carefully crafted scheme to gain entry to the lighthouse and overpower its solitary keeper. In the days that followed, as I tended to my bruises and provided statements to various law enforcement agencies, I found myself reflecting on how narrowly I had escaped disaster. My desire to help, my basic human decency, had almost led to my downfall. Yet, as I stood in the lantern room, watching the beams sweep out into the darkness, I felt a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos that had unfolded. As I gazed over the tranquil sea, a realization washed over me. Yes, there existed shadows in the world, men like Martin, who would twist kindness for their own selfish ends. Yet, amidst this darkness, there shone a light. The Coast Guard, who had come to my aid, the dedicated officers striving to bring smugglers to justice, and even my own unwavering spirit. These were all flickers of hope in their own right. I resolved to remain the keeper of Marrow Point. This lighthouse had been my sanctuary for far too long to forsake it now. However, I would tread more carefully in the days to come, becoming more discerning about whom I chose to trust. As the evening shadows deepened, I retreated into my sanctuary, reigniting the beacon that had guided many before me. A renewed sense of purpose enveloped me. I was not merely a keeper of the lighthouse, but a steadfast guardian of this secluded realm. Whether faced with tempest or trespasser, I resolved to stand my ground. The light cast its unwavering glow across the restless waves, and I remained vigilant, prepared for whatever the night might unveil. When he slipped into the back seat, an unsettling intuition washed over me. The wild, desperate glimmer in his eyes hinted that this journey would be anything but ordinary. A chill crept down my spine, and little did I know, I was about to become an unwitting accomplice in a night that would test my limits. I had been driving for Uber for about 6 months, primarily to supplement my day job income. Most nights were uneventful. Drunk college kids, business people running late, tourists eager to see as much as possible. But this night felt different from the very beginning. It was around 2 a.m. That stillness of the night when the bars have closed and the city lingers in a sleepy haze. I was on the verge of calling it a night when a notification chimed on my app. The pickup location was in an unfamiliar part of town, filled with mostly abandoned warehouses and shuttered factories. A moment of hesitation washed over me, my instincts urging me to turn back and head home. Yet, the allure of one last fare beckoned, and I found myself weaving through the labyrinth of shadowy streets. As I arrived at the address, I spotted him. A man in his mid-30s, dressed in the dim light, a figure clad in dark clothing lingered in the shadows of a graffiti-covered wall, glancing around with a nervous energy, as if anticipating an unexpected encounter. "You the Uber?" he called out as I drew near. I nodded, mustering a smile. "That's me. Where are we headed tonight?" He hesitated, then slid into the back seat, closing the door behind him. The car was enveloped in a peculiar mix of sweat and an unidentifiable metallic scent. "Just drive," he instructed, his voice low and tense. "I'll give you directions as we go." Every instinct within me urged to eject this man from the car and flee, yet I found myself merging back onto the desolate street. We traveled in silence for a time, the man occasionally murmuring directions. We were leaving the city behind, heading toward the rural outskirts where buildings became fewer, replaced by fields and the occasional farmhouse. In an attempt to ease the tension, I asked, "Late night or early morning for you?" He grunted in reply, his gaze fixed on the side mirror. "You always this chatty?" I fell silent after that, my attention drawn elsewhere. The road ahead lay shrouded in an unsettling silence, the only sounds being the steady hum of the engine and the sporadic ping of my phone. After about 20 minutes, he suddenly commanded, "Pull over here." We found ourselves in the midst of nowhere, a dirt road stretching endlessly on either side, with nothing but an old, dilapidated barn about 100 yards off the road. "Look, man," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what's going on here." But he interrupted me, his tone sharp. It was then that I noticed something glinting in his hand. A knife. My blood ran cold as he spoke, his voice unervingly calm. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to wait here while I take care of some business in that barn. When I return, you'll drive me back to the city, no questions asked." "Got it." I nodded, my mouth too dry to utter a word. "Good," he continued. "And just so we're clear, if you try to leave or call anyone, things will get very unpleasant for you. Understand?" Another nod followed as he stepped out of the car, walking towards the barn, his figure fading into the shadows. As soon as he was out of sight, I let out a shaky breath, unaware that I had been holding it. My mind raced with questions. What had I gotten myself into? Was this man a drug dealer, a killer? Should I attempt to flee? I glanced at my phone. No signal, of course. Minutes dragged on, stretching into what felt like hours. Every sound sent a jolt through me. The rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl. I braced myself for gunshots or screams, but silence enveloped me. After what seemed like an eternity, I noticed movement by the barn. The man was returning. He wasn't alone. There was someone else with him, stumbling along as if she were injured or under the influence. As they drew nearer, I could see it was a woman, her hands bound behind her back, a gag muffling her cries. Her eyes were wide with terror, and my heart raced, pounding so fiercely I feared it might escape my chest. This was no mere shady deal. It was a kidnapping, and I found myself ensnared in the midst of it all. The man forcefully shoved the woman into the back seat before sliding in beside her. "Drive," he commanded, and I felt the weight of the moment settle heavily upon me as I put the car in gear. With hands trembling on the steering wheel, we pulled away, and I caught a glimpse of the woman in the rearview mirror. The fear and desperation in her eyes weighed heavily on my heart, compelling me to act. After about 10 minutes of driving, I spotted an opportunity ahead, a sharp bend in the road, with a steep drop-off looming on one side. I took a deep breath, whispered a silent prayer, and prepared to make my move. As we neared the turn, I suddenly jerked the wheel hard to the right. The car skidded, tires squealing against the asphalt, and the man yelled, caught off guard by the sudden shift. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a surge of urgency as I slammed on the brakes, swiftly shifting the car into park. With a racing heart, I scrambled out of the driver's seat and flung open the back door. The woman tumbled out, and I grasped her arm, pulling her along as we dashed away. The man's shouts echoed behind us, his footsteps drawing nearer. We fled toward a thick cluster of trees, the uneven ground causing us to stumble. Suddenly, a gunshot pierced the air, sending a chill down my spine. The woman faltered, a muffled cry escaping her gagged lips. I quickly pulled her behind a sturdy tree, both of us holding our breath in the tense silence that followed. Breathing hard, I called out into the night, "Come out! Come out!" My voice echoed, a haunting sound that lingered in the darkness. "You're only making this worse for yourselves." I glanced at the woman beside me, trying to convey with my eyes that silence was our ally. Slowly, carefully, I untied her hands and removed the gag. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Another shot rang out, closer this time, causing us to flinch as we pressed ourselves against the sturdy trunk of the tree. "I have an idea," I murmured back, knowing it was risky. She nodded, her determination clear, willing to try anything. I picked up a large rock, feeling the weight of our choices in that chilling moment. With a swift motion, I cast it far into the shadows, the sound of its crash echoing through the stillness, drawing the man's focus away from us. We could hear him moving, retreating towards the noise. In a hushed urgency, I urged my companion, and we ran, abandoning all caution. Our only hope lay in reaching the road, where help might await us. We burst through the thicket, the road stretching out before us like a beacon. And there, as if summoned by our desperation, a pair of headlights emerged from the darkness. I waved my arms wildly, my voice rising in a frantic call. The old pickup truck slowed, then came to a halt, a glimmer of salvation in the night. Driven by a bewildered-looking elderly man, I gasped, "Please, we need help. There's a man with a gun." Before I could finish, another shot rang out. The old man's eyes widened in fear, but to his credit, he didn't drive off. Instead, he reached over and flung open the passenger door. "Get in," he yelled. We didn't need to be told twice. We piled into the truck, the woman practically in my lap in the cramped cab. As we sped off, I caught a glimpse of the man emerging from the trees in my side mirror, his face contorted with rage. George, who introduced himself, drove us directly to the nearest police station. The next few hours passed in a haze of statements and questions. The woman, Olivia, had been kidnapped by her ex-husband, who had been stalking her for months. As dawn broke, I found myself sitting on a bench outside the police station, feeling both exhausted and relieved. Olivia emerged and sat beside me. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life." I shook my head, replying, "I'm just glad we both made it out okay." She squeezed my hand, and we shared a moment of quiet understanding. In the stillness of the morning, I found myself reflecting on the days that followed that fateful night. I offered more statements, identified the man in a lineup, and ultimately stood firm as a witness at his trial. He was sentenced to a long time away, and I made the decision to stop driving for Uber. That experience revealed to me how swiftly an ordinary moment could spiral into danger. Yet, it also unveiled a deeper truth about myself. When faced with the brink of fear, I discovered a reservoir of courage I never knew I possessed. Now, as an Uber passes by, I find myself whispering a quiet acknowledgement, a little prayer for the driver and their passengers. For you never know when a simple ride might transform into the most harrowing journey of your life. I never imagined a garden gnome could be a harbinger of terror, but as I gazed at the ceramic figure mysteriously placed on my porch, its painted eyes seeming to follow my every move, I understood that my quiet life in this small town was on the brink of a sinister turn. My name's Emily, and I moved to Oakdale about 6 months ago, after years of hustling in the big city. I was ready for, in the heart of Oakdale, a quaint rural town where time seemed to linger, I found a change of pace that felt just right. It was a place where neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles, and life unfolded at a gentle rhythm. I purchased a charming little house on the outskirts, complete with a spacious yard that whispered promises of a flourishing vegetable garden. The initial months were a dream. I worked remotely from my sunlit office, while evenings were spent nurturing my garden or sharing stories with neighbors over the fence. Among them, Christopher, my next-door neighbor, stood out with his particularly friendly demeanor. A middle-aged man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and an easy smile, always ready to lend a hand with yard work or home repairs. I appreciated his kindness as a single woman living alone. It was Christopher who first noticed the gnome. One evening, while I was watering my tomato plants, he called over the fence, "Hey Emily, when did you get the new garden decoration?" I looked up, confused, at what he was pointing to on my front porch. The gnome, a cute little fella. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't bought any gnome. Excusing myself, I walked around to, at the front of the house, there stood a typical garden gnome, about a foot tall, adorned with a red hat and a cheerful expression. Yet something about it felt unsettling. I picked it up gingerly, searching for any clue of its origin, but found nothing. No tag, no marking, just the smooth, cold ceramic. Perhaps it was merely a welcome gift from one of the neighbors, I told myself, trying to dispel the unease that crept in. I placed the gnome back on the porch and stepped inside, determined to forget about it. But the feeling lingered, refusing to let go. That night, I found myself waking repeatedly, convinced I had heard something stirring outside. Each time I peered out the window, there it was, the gnome, its unchanging smile illuminated by the moonlight. When morning arrived, I awoke feeling drained and uneasy, shuffling to the kitchen to brew some coffee. As I cast a glance out the front window, I froze in place. The gnome had shifted. It now faced the house, as if it were staring right at me. My heart quickened, and I reassured myself that perhaps I had accidentally nudged it the night before, though deep down, I knew I hadn't touched it at all. In the days that followed, unease settled in like a thick fog. Each morning, a curious pattern unfolded. The gnome would find itself in a different position, occasionally facing a new direction, or even relocated to an entirely different spot in the yard. I began to capture these moments with my camera, trying to reassure myself that I wasn't losing my mind. The thought of confiding in Christopher crossed my mind, yet something restrained me. Perhaps it was the way his friendly smile seemed to falter, not quite reaching his eyes. Or maybe it was the unsettling realization that I had spotted him outside at peculiar hours, always gazing toward my house. A week after the gnome made its presence known, I returned home from grocery shopping to discover my front door ajar. I was certain I had secured it, as I always did. My heart raced as I stepped inside, half anticipating the unwelcome presence of an intruder. The scene appeared ordinary, yet a peculiar scent lingered in the air, a blend of cigarette smoke and something metallic. I decided to call the police, but they found no evidence of forced entry. They suggested I might have simply forgotten to lock the door or that perhaps a draft had nudged it open. I nodded in agreement and expressed my gratitude for their assistance. But I knew better that night. I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made me jump. I kept thinking I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. When my alarm went off in the morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Bleary-eyed, I went to make coffee and saw something that made my blood run cold. There on my kitchen table was the gnome, its cheerful smile now seeming sinister, almost mocking. I backed away, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. I never brought the gnome inside. Someone had been in my house, in my safe space. With shaking hands, I called my best friend Olivia, urging her to come over. My voice steady despite the unease that gripped me. Something was amiss. Within the hour, she arrived, concern etched on her face. I recounted everything, the gnome that had appeared, the strange movements, the unlocked door, and now this. To her credit, she didn't dismiss my fears or suggest I was imagining things. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" she asked, her brow furrowed in thought. I hesitated, then shared my observations about Christopher, his unsettling friendliness, the odd hours he kept, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Olivia's eyes widened, reflecting the weight of the night's mysteries. "Emily, listen closely. This isn't merely a figment of your imagination. There's something unsettling at play here. We must reach out to the police once more." This time, they took my worries to heart. They meticulously dusted for fingerprints and discovered several that were not my own. They assured me they would enhance patrols in the neighborhood and recommended I install security cameras. That night, Olivia stayed by my side, and we dedicated hours to setting up cameras around the house and yard. We even relocated the gnome to the backyard, ensuring it would be clearly visible on the cameras. As dawn broke, we eagerly reviewed the footage. Footage rolled for hours, and yet nothing stirred. Then, as the clock struck 3 a.m., the stillness began to shift. A figure emerged on the screen, and my heart froze as I recognized Christopher's silhouette. We watched, breathless, as he stealthily moved around the yard, eventually lifting the gnome and placing it on the front porch. "Oh my God," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "Aura, he's been gaslighting you this whole time." A wave of nausea washed over me. All those seemingly friendly gestures, the offers of assistance, had been nothing more than a cunning ruse to draw closer, to study my habits. We called the police without hesitation. They arrived swiftly, scrutinizing the footage with a grave intensity. As I approached Christopher's house, a sense of unease settled over me. The officers, armed with a warrant, stepped inside, and what they uncovered sent a chill racing down my spine. The walls were adorned with countless images of me, sleeping, tending to my garden, captured through my own windows. It became clear that Christopher had been watching me, consumed by an obsession that had lasted for months. Among the items they discovered were intricate plans detailing his intentions to claim me as his own. As they escorted Christopher away in handcuffs, he turned to me, his expression a disturbing blend of anger and what could only be described as a twisted affection. "We were meant to be together," he shouted. "I was just trying to protect you." In the days that followed, I uncovered more about the darkness that had been lurking so close to home. Christopher had a history, a shadowy past marked by the unsettling pursuit of women in various towns, always slipping away before he could be apprehended. Oakdale had become his latest hunting ground, and I found myself ensnared in his sights. The gnome, it turned out, was his twisted game, a means of toying with my mind, leaving me to question my own sanity. Each subtle movement of the gnome was a chilling reminder, a message that whispered, "I can reach you whenever I choose." It took a long time for me to reclaim a sense of safety within my own home. I fortified my defenses with better locks, installed a security system, and even welcomed a large dog named Olivia into my life, seeking comfort in her presence. For a few weeks, they stayed by my side, guiding me through the shadows of what had transpired. Gradually, life in Oakdale began to settle into a new rhythm, a different kind of normal. My neighbors, deeply affected by the events, came together in support. They checked in on me often, helped fortify my home, and ensured I was never alone unless I chose to be. As for the gnome, I found it too difficult to keep. Instead, I transformed it into a beacon of hope, donating it to a local art project aimed at raising awareness about stalking and domestic violence. Seeing it repurposed brought a sense of purpose amidst the lingering unease. Transformed, broken apart, and reformed into a beautiful mosaic, I found a path to healing today, a year after that terrifying ordeal. Still in Oakdale, I've reclaimed my home and my peace of mind. My garden thrives, and I've forged genuine friendships with my neighbors. Yet, I carry with me a haunting lesson. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators lurk in plain sight, cloaked in friendly smiles and outstretched hands. Even a seemingly innocuous object, like a garden gnome, can stand as a silent sentinel of terror. Every now and then, when the wind whispers through the trees, I think I hear the delicate sound of ceramic scraping against wood. In those moments, I take a deep breath, reminding myself that I am safe and that the nightmare has passed. Yet, I always check my locks just to be sure. The instant I heard the first gunshot echo through the forest, I understood that our camping trip had transformed into a struggle for survival. What began as a serene escape with friends had swiftly morphed into a haunting ordeal, and the woods that once felt inviting now loomed like a treacherous shadow. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. My best friend Michael, his girlfriend Emily, and my boyfriend Christopher had been planning this camping trip to White Mountain for months. We were all eager to escape the noise and stress of the city, yearning to reconnect with nature and with one another. Little did we know what awaited us in those seemingly peaceful woods. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun beginning to dip behind the tall pines. The drive had been long, but the thrill of the adventure ahead kept our spirits high as we found a beautiful spot to set up camp, far from the designated campgrounds. Michael had insisted on going off the beaten path, claiming it would offer us a more authentic experience. None of us thought to argue. Setting up camp was a breeze. Michael and Christopher handled the tents while Emily and I gathered firewood. As darkness fell, we sat around the crackling fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The night sky above us was a blanket of stars, more than I had ever seen in my light-polluted city life. It was breathtaking. "This is perfect," Emily whispered. She sighed, leaning her head on Michael's shoulder. "We should do this more often," she said, and we all murmured in agreement, feeling a sense of contentment and peace. If only we had known it was the calm before the storm. The next day, we decided to go for a hike. Michael had found a trail on his map that led to a secluded waterfall. "It'll be a bit of a trek," he said, "but the view will be worth it." We set off early, the morning dew still clinging to the leaves. The hike was challenging yet exhilarating, the forest alive with the sounds of birds and small animals. The air was fresh and invigorating as we paused now and then to capture photos or admire particularly beautiful vistas. It was around midday when we finally reached the waterfall, and Michael had been right, it was stunning. Crystal clear water cascaded down moss-covered rocks into a serene pool below. We decided to take a break, eat our packed lunches, and perhaps even take a dip in the cool water. That's when we heard it, voices carried on the wind. At first, we thought they might belong to other hikers, but as the voices drew nearer, we sensed something was amiss. In the stillness of the night, Christopher's voice broke the silence, urgent and filled with trepidation. His eyes, wide with fear, urged us to act quickly. Without a word, we gathered our belongings and slipped behind the large boulders that stood sentinel by the water's edge. From our concealed vantage point, we watched as a group of men emerged from the shadows of the trees on the far side of the clearing. They appeared rough, rifles slung over their shoulders, their voices low and tense. "This is our territory," one of them growled, a menacing edge to his words. "We need to send a message to those city folks. Show them they're not welcome here." A chill crept down my spine as I realized the gravity of their intentions. In the shadows, we found ourselves cloaked in silence, barely daring to breathe as the men spoke in hushed tones. It became evident that they were part of a local militia, their anger directed at those who dared to intrude upon their woods. They discussed setting traps and teaching lessons to those who trespassed, their words hanging heavy in the air. Time seemed to stretch, though it was likely only 20 minutes before they finally moved on. We remained still, listening intently until their voices faded into the distance. "We need to get out of here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. At that moment, no one dared to argue as we started our descent down the trail, moving swiftly and silently. The forest, which had felt so inviting just hours before, now loomed over us, heavy and foreboding. Each crack of a twig sent shivers down our spines, and every rustle in the underbrush hinted at unseen dangers. We were about halfway back to our campsite when the first gunshot pierced the air, sharp and clear, followed by shouts and more gunfire. "Run!" Michael shouted, seizing Emily's hand. We bolted, all thoughts of stealth slipping away in our haste. Branches lashed against our faces as we pushed through the thick undergrowth, the sound of footsteps drawing nearer behind us. Time lost its grip in the green haze of the forest. My lungs ached, and my legs felt heavy, yet fear propelled me forward. Suddenly, Michael faltered, a cry escaping his lips as he twisted his ankle on an unseen root. Christopher and I rushed to his side, lifting him between us, our pace slowing but our urgency unwavering. We stumbled upon a dense thicket and slipped inside, gently helping Michael to sit down, our hearts racing in the stillness that followed. Emily carefully wrapped the bandage around his ankle, using the supplies from her small first aid kit, while Christopher and I stood guard. "What are we going to do?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "We need to get back to the campsite," Christopher urged. Get our phones and call for help. But what if they're waiting for us there? I asked, a fresh wave of panic washing over me. Before anyone could respond, we heard voices nearby. We froze, hardly daring to breathe. They couldn't have gotten far, a gruff voice said. The girl left a trail. Even a blind man could follow. I looked down in horror, realizing my shirt had torn on a branch, leaving behind small scraps of fabric. We need to move, Michael whispered urgently. They'll find us if we stay here. Despite his injured ankle, Michael insisted he could move. We helped him up, and once again we were on the run. But this time, we moved more carefully, doing our best to leave no trail as we crept through the forest. The sounds of our pursuers seemed to be all around us. A twig would snap to our left, voices would carry from the right. As the shadows deepened, we found ourselves ensnared in a peculiar game, one that felt both unsettling and inevitable. The night wrapped around us, slowing our steps, while fear clung to our hearts like a heavy fog. We were lost, weary, and yet, an instinct to press on urged us forward. It was Christopher who first noticed the cave, its entrance shrouded by a veil of vines, promising a brief respite from our relentless pursuit. We slipped inside, relief washing over us like a cool breeze. We can't keep running forever, Emily murmured, echoing the thoughts that weighed heavily on us all. We need a plan. I say we wait until full dark, Michael proposed, his voice barely above a whisper. Then try to circle back, the campsite. If we could reach our phones, we could call for help. It was a risky plan, but it was the only one we had. We settled in to wait, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Hours passed, and the forest outside grew quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of a small animal. When we could no longer see anything beyond the cave entrance, we knew it was time to move. Our progress was painfully slow. Michael's ankle had swollen, making each step agony for him. We had to stop frequently to listen for any signs of life. In the midst of our frantic escape, we finally returned to our campsite, only to be met with a sight that sent a chill through my heart. Our tents lay slashed, supplies strewn about like forgotten remnants of a once peaceful night. It was evident that the men had come and gone. Quick, Christopher whispered, urgency lacing his voice. Grab anything useful and let's go. We moved swiftly, gathering what we could. Amidst the chaos, I unearthed my phone, nestled beneath some torn sleeping bags. The battery was low, yet it still flickered to life. With trembling hands, I dialed 911. The hours that followed blurred together, our senses heightened as we continued to move, always on edge, while I struggled to convey our location to the emergency dispatcher. When we finally heard the distant thrum of helicopter blades, a wave of relief washed over me. The forest rangers found us just as dawn began to break. We were dehydrated, exhausted, and traumatized, yet we were alive. As they guided us to safety, we learned that the men who had been pursuing us were part of a known anti-government group, causing unrest in the area for months. In the days that followed, as we gave statements to the police and tried to make sense of our ordeal, I found myself reflecting on how swiftly our peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare. What began as a serene journey into the White Mountains soon morphed into a haunting experience. The woods, once inviting, unveiled a shadowy and perilous nature. We ventured into that wilderness in search of adventure and connection, and while we did find those elements, they came wrapped in unexpected fear. Our encounter with danger forged a bond between us, deeper than any ordinary camping trip could offer. We witnessed each other at our most vulnerable, at the brink of terror, yet we emerged together, stronger. Now, as I sit in the safety of my city apartment, the echoes of those gunshots linger in my mind, a chilling reminder of that night. In the stillness of the night, a sense of panic washed over me, as if I were being hunted through the shadows. Yet, amidst that fear, I found a remarkable strength in the bonds we forged. a resilience we never knew we possessed. Will I ever venture into the wilderness again? The answer remains uncertain. However, I carry with me the knowledge that I can confront whatever challenges life may present. After all, I emerged from a night steeped in terror in the White Mountain. What could possibly be more frightening than that? The moment I caught a glimpse of their eyes in my rearview mirror, I understood that I had unwittingly entered a realm far more sinister than a mere pit stop. What should have been a simple refueling transformed into a desperate struggle for survival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape, I found myself in a predicament that felt all too surreal. What had begun as a simple road trip, a journey towards new beginnings in California, had taken a turn into the unknown. Hours on the highway had lulled me into a false sense of security, the rhythmic hum of the tires and the melodies from the radio weaving a comforting cocoon around me. But now, with the gas gauge flirting with empty and no station in sight, the vast, eerie emptiness of the desert loomed ominously, as if the very land itself conspired to keep me from my destination. The stillness was unsettling, and I could almost hear the whispers of the night beckoning me to stay, to listen to the stories hidden within the shadows. As the unease began to settle in, I found myself scanning the horizon for any sign of hope. Just then, a glimmer of relief appeared, a sign reading "Last Chance Gas 5 miles ahead." The name was unfamiliar, but in a desolate stretch of road, one must take what they can get, especially when the fuel gauge was perilously low. The exit ramp led me into a quaint, dusty town that seemed frozen in time, reminiscent of the 1950s. Faded storefronts lined the main street, their windows dark and uninviting, casting an eerie shadow over the scene. At the far end, the gas station awaited, its neon sign flickering weakly against the encroaching twilight. As I pulled up to the pump, I couldn't help but notice a small gathering of locals, their presence adding to the unsettling atmosphere of the night. As I approached the station's convenience store, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. Their eyes were fixed on me, tracking my every step, and an unsettling chill began to creep up my spine. I attempted to dismiss the feeling, convincing myself that it was merely paranoia. With a friendly tone, I called out, "You folks know if this place is still open?" A tall, lean man with a weathered face stepped forward, his voice flat as he replied, "Sure is. Why don't you go on inside and see Mitch? He'll get you sorted." I nodded in gratitude and made my way inside. As I stepped into the store, the bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere outside. The interior was dimly lit, with cluttered shelves stocked with dusty cans and faded packages. Behind the counter stood a man I assumed was Mitch, his roomy eyes regarding me with an unsettling intensity. "Just passing through?" he asked as I approached, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Yeah, on my way to California," I replied, fishing out my wallet. "Could I get 40 on pump 3, please?" Mitch's eyes narrowed slightly. "California, huh? The path ahead. Are you certain you want to continue on this dark road tonight? There's a motel just down the way. It might be wiser to rest before we venture further." There was something in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. "No, I'm fine to keep driving," I replied, striving to maintain a calm demeanor. "I'll just fill up the tank and be on my way." Mitch shrugged, but I noticed a new intensity in his eyes as he processed the transaction in silence, his gaze darting to the shadows beyond. As I stood there, a shiver ran down my spine. I turned, half expecting to find someone lurking in the shadows, but only the empty store greeted me. With each step back to my car, an unsettling sensation crept over me, as if I were being watched by countless unseen eyes. The group by the store had swelled in size, their gazes fixed upon me, unyielding and cold. I kept my head down, concentrating on the mundane task of filling my tank, willing the numbers to rise more quickly. Just as I completed my task, the crunch of gravel echoed behind me. I turned to find the tall man from earlier, flanked by two others, their faces etched with grim determination. Almost predatory, the tall man spoke, his voice low and menacing. "We don't get many outsiders around here. Folks tend to get lost. Lost, if you catch my meaning." My heart began to race as I fumbled with the gas cap, trying to appear calm. "Well, I appreciate your concern, but I really should be going," I said, attempting to get into my car. But one of the other men stepped forward, blocking my path. "Now hold on there," he said, his meaty hand coming to rest on my car door. "We can't in good conscience let you drive off into the night. Why don't you come with us?" In that moment, a deep sense of foreboding washed over me. I knew, without a doubt, that if I chose to follow those men, I would vanish into the shadows. With a rush of adrenaline, I pushed past them, leaping into my car and slamming the lock just as hands reached for the door handle. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as I sped away from the gas station. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of the men sprinting toward their trucks, while the town stirred awake, lights flickering on in homes and more vehicles emerging onto the road behind me. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, heart racing as the night unfolded around me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I pressed the accelerator, urging my car to its limits. The desert night rushed past in a blur, interrupted only by the harsh glare of headlights reflecting in my mirrors. The sound of engines roared behind me, drawing closer with each fleeting second. In a moment of desperation, I took a sharp turn onto a side road, hoping to lose them, but they seemed to know these paths far better than I. Every twist and turn I made, they mirrored, as my mind raced to devise a plan. I realized I couldn't outrun them forever, and the fuel in my tank wouldn't last indefinitely. As I crested a hill, I caught sight of something ahead. Salvation lay ahead, a distant highway shimmering like a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. If only I could reach it, I would find safety. With determination, I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the engine protesting as I urged it beyond its limits. The pursuing vehicles were right on my tail, their shouts mingling with the occasional ping of something striking my car. Were they shooting at me? The highway was so close now, just a few more seconds. With a final burst of speed, I shot onto the on-ramp, merging into the flow of traffic. I weaved between cars, pushing forward with all my might. As I created as much distance as possible from my pursuers, I finally mustered the courage to glance in my rearview mirror. Their headlights were fading into the night, unable to follow me onto the bustling highway. I pressed on, not easing my speed until the first light of dawn began to illuminate the desert landscape, casting a soft glow over everything. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel tightly, and my body was tense. Yet I felt a profound sense of relief. I was alive, and I was free. When I finally deemed it safe to stop, I pulled into a lively truck stop, my leg trembling as I stepped out of the car. The events of that night lingered in my mind, surreal against the bright light of day. Had I conjured it all in my imagination? Yet, the dents in my car door and the empty gas tank stood as stark reminders of the terrifying reality I had faced. I found a payphone and called the police, my voice trembling as I shared my experience. They took my statement, but I could sense the skepticism in the officer's tone. A whole town of crazed kidnappers. It sounded absurd, even to my own ears. As I waited for my car to fill up, surrounded by the reassuring bustle of ordinary travelers, an unsettling feeling clung to me, refusing to let go. The memory of those cold, predatory eyes lingers, and I often ponder what might have transpired had I not escaped. How many others were not so fortunate? The truth about that town remains elusive. Over the years, I've meticulously examined maps and scoured the internet, yet the last chance gas station and the nameless town that almost claimed me remain shrouded in mystery. In the stillness of the night, I find myself questioning whether it ever truly existed or if it was merely a figment of my weary mind, conjured by the relentless desert heat. But then I glance at my car at the small dents that no body shop has ever been able to fully repair. I know it was real. Somewhere out there, hidden in the vast expanse of the American desert, there's a town that preys on unsuspecting travelers. I remember how close I came to becoming just another missing person, another mystery for someone else to solve. I still take road trips sometimes, but I never drive at night anymore. I always make sure my tank is full before I hit those long, lonely stretches of highway, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Imagine, if you will, the quiet roads leading to small towns, where time seems to stand still. A simple pit stop can shift from a moment of respite to a struggle for survival, where the line between life and death is drawn by something as mundane as a full tank of gas. The moment I locked eyes with the boy, a chill ran down my spine. I realized then that my act of kindness had ensnared me in a web of danger, plunging me into a nightmare beyond my wildest fears. I've always been one to seek adventure, and yet, in that moment of stress, I found myself teetering on the edge of the unknown. The city, the weight of my job felt distant, so I embarked on a solo camping trip into the vast wilderness of Adirondack Mountains. I yearned for solitude, a moment to clear my mind and reconnect with nature. Little did I know what awaited me in those woods. The first few days unfolded just as I had envisioned. I wandered through dense forests, captivated by the towering pines and the harmonious chorus of birdsong that surrounded me. I pitched my tent beside crystal-clear streams, drifting off to sleep to the soothing babble of water over rocks, feeling a sense of peace I had longed for. For months, I had felt a sense of tranquility, but on the fourth day, everything shifted. I had wandered deeper into the wilderness than I had intended, lured by the allure of a picturesque valley I had discovered on my map. The hike was demanding, yet the breathtaking views made it worthwhile. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting brilliant hues of orange and pink across the sky, I began my journey back to my campsite. That's when I heard it. A faint cry, nearly swallowed by the rustling leaves and the evening chorus of birds. I paused, straining to listen, and there it was again, unmistakably human. In the stillness of the night, a sense of urgency tugged at my heart as I strayed from the path, drawn by the haunting cries that echoed through the shadows. Pushing aside the thick underbrush, the sounds intensified, guiding me to a small clearing where a young boy lay on the ground, perhaps 8 years old, clutching his leg. I called out gently, not wanting to startle him. "Hey there, are you okay?" His tear-streaked face looked up at me, dirt smudged across his cheeks. I fell," he whimpered. "My leg hurts. I can't move it." I approached him slowly, my heart heavy for this lost child. "It's all right," I murmured, hoping to soothe his fears. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" Liam sniffled.
Okay, Liam, I'm Emily.
"Let's take a look at that leg, shall we?" As I knelt beside him, I noticed his clothes were torn and dirty, as if he'd been out here for a while. How long had this poor kid been lost in the woods? I gently examined his leg, relieved to find no obvious breaks. It seemed to be just a bad sprain. "Good news, Liam. I don't think it's broken, but we should get you back to your family. Are they camping nearby?" Liam nodded, wiping his nose. The back of his hand, "Yes, not too far, but I'm unsure how to return." I smiled gently, reassuring him. "Don't worry, we'll find them together." "Together?" he echoed. "Can you walk if I help you?" He shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "It hurts too much." "All right then," I said, making a quick decision. "I'll carry you. Just point me in the right direction." Liam nodded, and I carefully lifted him onto my back. He was lighter than I expected, and I could feel his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. We set off, Liam giving me vague directions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest embraced the darkness. I switched on my headlamp, its narrow beam casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees as we ventured deeper. A nagging thought lingered in my mind. Liam's directions seemed to draw us further into the woods, away from any familiar campsites. Yet, I brushed it aside, reminding myself that children often lost their way in the wilderness. Surely we would find his family soon. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, a faint light flickered through the trees, beckoning us closer. Liam, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I thought we had found them, but as we drew nearer, that relief began to twist into unease. What lay before us was not a campsite, but a ramshackle cabin, barely discernible in the encroaching gloom. A single grimy window flickered with light. "Is this where your family is staying?" I asked, a hint of skepticism creeping into my voice. "Yep," Liam chirped, suddenly sounding much more cheerful. "You can put me down now. I can walk the rest of the way." Alarm bells rang in my head, but before I could react, the cabin door burst open, and 3 men emerged. Their faces shrouded in shadow, one of them called out, "Good job, Liam. You can come here now." Liam scrambled off my back with an agility that belied his supposed injury, darting towards the men and vanishing behind them into the cabin. I stood frozen, my mind grappling with the unfolding scene. One of the men stepped forward, his features becoming clear, weathered with cold eyes that sent a chill down my spine. Well, he drawled. "Looks like Liam brought us a guest. Why don't you come inside? We insist." I took a step back. My heart raced, and I thought to myself that I should be heading back. My campsite was not far, and surely people would be waiting for me. But the man's laughter was harsh, devoid of any warmth. "Oh, I don't think so," he said, his voice chilling. "You see, you're a long way from any campsite out here, and no one is expecting you. No one even knows you're here." In an instant, he lunged forward, seizing my arm in a grip that felt like iron. I struggled to break free, but his strength was overwhelming. As the other 2 men drew closer, I caught sight of a knife glinting ominously in one of their hands. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he warned, his tone cold and unyielding. In that tense moment, the first man growled, and instinct for survival surged within me. I brought my knee up sharply, catching my captor in the groin. As he doubled over, I seized the chance to wrench my arm free and fled into the night. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, the sounds of shouts and heavy footsteps echoing behind me. I ran blindly, with no clear destination, driven solely by the primal need to escape. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, yet I dared not slow down. The sound of their pursuit grew closer, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked just behind me. Angry shouts echoed through the trees, and suddenly, the ground vanished beneath me. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at my clothes and skin. When I finally came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain, I struggled to my feet and realized I had fallen into a shallow ravine. The sound of rushing water reached my ears, a river hidden in the darkness. Without a second thought, I plunged in, letting the current carry me downstream and away from my pursuers. The water was icy cold, shocking the breath from my lungs, and I fought to. As the river carried me away, I struggled to keep my head above water. Behind me, the distant shouts of frustration echoed, a reminder that they had lost my trail. Time became a blur. It could have been mere minutes or perhaps hours. Finally, utterly exhausted and half frozen, I managed to pull myself onto the riverbank. There, I lay for what felt like an eternity, shivering and gasping for breath as the adrenaline faded. The stark reality of my situation began to settle in. I was lost in the wilderness, drenched, without supplies, and utterly unsure of which direction to take. And somewhere out there, the night loomed, thick with uncertainty. There they were, those men still searching for me. I summoned the strength to rise, aware that remaining in one spot was not an option. I chose a direction and began to walk, letting the stars guide my way. Each snapping twig sent a shiver down my spine, and every shadow felt like a lurking danger. I journeyed through the night and into the dawn, pausing only when fatigue began to take hold. I foraged for berries and quenched my thirst at streams, ever vigilant, glancing over my shoulder and straining to catch the faintest sound of pursuit. It was late afternoon when I finally heard it. In a moment that felt both surreal and urgent, I found myself drawn away from the forest by the distant rumble of a car engine. With a renewed sense of purpose, I pushed forward toward the sound. Eventually, I broke through the tree line and was greeted by a road stretching endlessly before me. I waved down the first car that came into view, likely appearing quite wild with my torn clothes and tangled hair. The elderly couple inside looked alarmed at first, but as I shared my story, their expressions softened, and they kindly offered to drive me to the nearest town. At the local police station, I recounted my harrowing experience, though the officers listened with a hint of skepticism in their eyes. At first, the atmosphere was light, but as I painted the picture of the cabin and the men, their faces shifted to a more somber tone. They shared whispers of a group rumored to dwell in those woods, possibly entangled in dark deeds. My account became the first tangible clue they had encountered. In the days that followed, while I rested in a modest motel, news reached me that the police had located the cabin, yet it stood deserted. The men and the boy had slipped away into the sprawling wilderness, leaving behind only lingering questions and an unsettling memory. In the quiet moments of reflection, I find myself recalling the times I ventured into the great outdoors. Camping still calls to me, though I never embark on such journeys alone or in places unknown. The experience was a stark reminder that while nature can be a canvas of beauty, it also conceals lurking perils. The most fearsome predators can often wear familiar faces. Now, when I encounter a lost child, I feel a tug of war within me, an urge to assist battling with the haunting memory of Liam's treachery. It's a sobering truth I carry with me. Sometimes, a gesture of goodwill can ensnare you in a web of danger, especially in the wild, where shadows dance and whispers linger. The line between savior and victim can vanish in an instant. The moment I noticed the desk clerk's eyes widen in fear as he handed me the room key, a chilling realization washed over me. We had made a grave mistake. But by then, it was far too late. We were ensnared in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. What was meant to be a romantic getaway for me and my girlfriend, Ava, had turned into something far more sinister. After a year of dating and both of us overwhelmed with work, we had longed for some time alone together. When I stumbled upon a great deal for a secluded motel online, little did we know the darkness that awaited us. It appeared to be just what we were looking for. The reviews, though few, were filled with praise, and the images depicted charming, rustic rooms nestled within enchanting woodlands. Without a moment's hesitation, we made our reservation. The journey took longer than we had anticipated, and by the time we arrived at the motel's gravel parking lot, darkness had enveloped the world around us. A thick fog crept in, shrouding everything beyond the faint glow of the vacancy sign. The building stood before us, a looming silhouette against the starless sky. "Well, this is atmospheric," Ava remarked, attempting to maintain a cheerful tone, though I could sense the hint of doubt in her voice. In her voice, I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It'll look better in the daylight. Come on, let's check in and get some rest." The reception area was small and poorly lit, with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. A musty smell hung in the air, reminiscent of old books and damp wood. Behind the desk stood a thin, nervous-looking man with darting eyes and a perpetual frown. "Welcome to Mountain View Motel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have a reservation?" I gave him our names, and he began typing slowly on an ancient keyboard. As he worked on the computer, I noticed his hands trembling ever so slightly. Is everything okay? I asked, concern lacing my voice. He looked up abruptly, a flicker of fear crossing his face for just a moment before he regained his composure. Of course, sir. Just a long night, he replied, handing me the key to room 17. As our fingers brushed, I felt him slip something into my palm, a small scrap of paper. Before I could respond, he turned away, engrossed in his paperwork. Puzzled, I pocketed the paper and led Ava to our destination. The corridor was dimly lit and eerily quiet, our footsteps echoing softly off the walls. A shiver ran down my spine as I sensed an unseen presence watching us. Room 17 awaited at the end of the hall. As I pushed the door open, it creaked ominously, revealing a space that bore little resemblance to the cheerful photos online. The furniture was old and battered, the carpet stained, and a single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that danced across the room. Maybe we should find somewhere else, Ava suggested, wrinkling her nose at the musty smell. I was about to agree. As I nodded in agreement, a chilling memory surfaced. I reached for the scrap of paper, unfolding it slowly, my heart racing as I read the hurriedly written words, "Don't sleep, don't shower, get out." Ava, sensing my unease, inquired about my expression. I revealed the note to her, watching as the color drained from her face. "We need to leave now," I urged, hastily grabbing our bags. But when I turned the handle, a wave of despair washed over me. The door refused to budge. I pulled with all my strength, then threw my shoulder against it, but it felt as immovable as a brick wall. "What's going on?" Ava's voice trembled, filled with fear. With a sense of unease, I declared, "We need to leave this place," attempting to infuse my voice with a confidence I didn't truly possess. I approached the window only to find it firmly sealed, the glass too thick to shatter with ease. It was then that we heard them, footsteps in the hallway, slow and purposeful, drawing nearer. Ava and I exchanged terrified glances, our breaths caught in our throats as the footsteps halted just outside our door. A heavy silence enveloped us, and then the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock echoed through the air. My thoughts raced, desperately searching for an escape, a weapon, anything at all, but there was no avenue left to pursue. We found ourselves in a dire situation, with no means of escape. The door creaked open, and there stood a tall, broad-shouldered man, his face as hard and unyielding as stone. Behind him loomed two others equally formidable. Well, the first man rumbled, his voice a deep growl. "Looks like we've got some new guests." I instinctively stepped in front of Ava, my heart racing. "What do you want from us?" I managed to ask. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "Want? Oh, we don't want anything. You're the ones who came to us, remember? Checked in of your own free will." A chill slithered down my spine as the weight of his words settled in the air around us. Words settled heavily in the air. This was no random attack, but a carefully laid trap. We had unwittingly walked right into it. "Please," Ava pleaded, her voice trembling, "just let us go. We won't tell anyone, I swear." The man responded with a laugh, devoid of warmth. "Oh, we know you won't tell anyone. No one ever does." They advanced into the room, and a sense of urgency washed over me. In a moment of desperation, I seized the lamp from the bedside table and swung it at the nearest man. It connected with a satisfying crunch, and he stumbled back, clutching his face. "Run!" I shouted to Ava, pushing past the chaos. Stunned men surrounded us, and with a swift pull, I urged her forward as we sprinted down the dimly lit hallway. The angry shouts and pounding footsteps echoed ominously behind us. The reception area lay deserted, the nervous clerk nowhere in sight. We burst through the front doors and into the enveloping fog of the night. Our car awaited us, just as we had left it, but my hands trembled so violently that I struggled to insert the keys into the ignition. Just as the engine roared to life, a hand suddenly smashed through the driver's side window, grasping at my throat. Ava's terrified scream pierced the air, and in a moment of instinct, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, propelling us forward into the unknown. As we lurched forward, the hand that had gripped me released its hold, and we sped away. In the rearview mirror, figures began to emerge from the fog, growing smaller as we put distance between ourselves and that hellish motel. We drove for hours, not daring to stop, jumping at every set of headlights that pierced the darkness. When the sun finally began to rise, we pulled into a busy truck stop, both of us exhausted and shell-shocked. "What just happened?" Ava asked, her voice hoarse. I shook my head, still struggling to process it all. "I don't know, but we need to call The local sheriff's department was initially doubtful, but as we shared our tale, weaving in the specifics of the motel and the men who had assaulted us, their demeanor shifted. They revealed that whispers of disappearances had lingered in that region for years, though no concrete proof had ever surfaced. In the days that followed, as we provided statements and identified suspects from photo lineups, the chilling reality of our escape began to unfold. Mountain View Motel was not merely a facade for abduction. It was entangled in something far more sinister. In the shadows of a larger trafficking operation that had eluded detection for years, the police raid on the motel revealed hidden rooms and the remnants of countless victims. Yet many key figures, including the men who had attacked us, had slipped away without a trace. Ava and I endeavored to piece our lives back together, but the memory of that night lingered like a specter, haunting our thoughts. Nightmares became our unwelcome companions, and we found ourselves jumping at shadows, forever glancing over our shoulders. The weight of our shared trauma strained our relationship, ultimately leading to its unraveling. Even now, years later, the act of driving fills me with an unsettling dread. As I pass by a motel, a sense of unease washes over me. The once inviting flashing vacancy signs now feel like ominous signals, luring unsuspecting travelers into the depths of night. I often ponder the fate of that anxious clerk who attempted to offer a warning. Did he manage to escape, or did he face the consequences of his fleeting moment of caution? Such mysteries may remain forever unanswered. What lingers in my mind is the unsettling truth that malevolence can lurk in the most unassuming places, patiently waiting for the unwary. A simple reservation, a quest for tranquility, can swiftly transform into a struggle for survival in an instant. As you prepare for your next adventure, an tempting offer for a quiet motel catches your eye. Take a moment to pause. For sometimes, the cost of a room can extend beyond mere dollars, and the stories of those who enter may linger long after they should have departed. The instant I heard the door click shut behind me, an unsettling feeling washed over me. This was no ordinary food delivery. The man's eyes, filled with a wild desperation, revealed that I had stumbled into a realm far more perilous than simply satisfying a late-night hunger. My name is David, and this is where my tale begins. For the past 6 months, I've been delivering pizzas for Tony's Pizzeria. It's not the most glamorous job, but it keeps the bills paid. Most nights, the biggest thrill comes from hoping for a generous tip. However, everything shifted on a quiet Tuesday night in October. It had been a slow evening, and I was ready to call it a night when one last order came through. The address was on the outskirts of town, in one of those sparse areas where houses are few and far between. I had delivered there before, so I didn't think much of it as I drove toward the homes. The street lights became more sparse, fewer and farther between, as the darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by the glow of my headlights. At last, I arrived at the house, a large, somewhat run-down 2-story structure that seemed to have seen better days. I took the pizza and approached the front door, where the porch light flickered ominously, casting strange shadows across the overgrown yard. I rang the doorbell, the sound echoing inside the house. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and a 5 o'clock shadow. His eyes flickered anxiously behind me before finally resting on my face. "Tony's Pizzeria," I said, mustering a smile. "That'll be $550. The man nodded, his movements jittery.
Come in, come in.
"I've got the money inside." A warning bell chimed in my mind. We weren't supposed to enter customers' homes. But before I could voice my concern, he seized my arm and pulled me inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock clicking into place. The interior of the house was dimly lit and cluttered, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. Thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the man could hear it. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really should just wait out." "Shut up," the man hissed, his eyes wild. "They'll hear you." "Who will hear me?" I asked, confusion mixing with my growing fear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. "They're out there," he muttered. "Watching. Always watching." I was starting to think I'd walked in on something unsettling. In the stillness of the night, a muffled cry echoed from upstairs, sending a chill down my spine. The man's head jerked towards the sound. Panic etched across his features. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling as adrenaline coursed through me. "Nothing," he replied hastily. "Just the TV. Now, about that pizza." But I was no longer focused on his words. The cry came again, louder this time, a woman's voice filled with distress. "There's someone up there," I insisted, stepping toward the stairs. "They need help." In an unexpected burst of energy, the man moved to block my path, his eyes wide with something unspoken. In the stillness of the moment, he growled, the facade of normalcy slipping away. "You're not going anywhere," he said. And that's when I noticed the gun, hidden in his waistband. A chill coursed through me as the weight of my predicament settled in. "Please," I pleaded, raising my hand slowly. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." His laughter echoed, a harsh and humorless sound. "It's too late for that. You're part of this now." Just then, another cry echoed from upstairs, followed by the ominous thud of something heavy falling. The man's eyes widened in panic. A whispered, "No, no, no," escaping his lips as he turned towards the stairs. In that fleeting moment of distraction, instinct took over. I hurled the pizza box at his face, the hot cheese and sauce momentarily blinding him as he stumbled back. I dashed for the door, my fingers fumbling with the lock, precious seconds slipping away as I struggled to open it. Behind me, I could hear the man recovering, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Just as my hand closed around the doorknob, a searing pain shot through my side. The man had tackled me. As we tumbled to the floor, the struggle began. My hands, slick with pizza grease, slipped as I tried to push him away. "You don't understand," he gasped, his face mere inches from mine. "I can't let you leave. They'll kill her if anyone finds out." A scream echoed from upstairs, clearer this time. "Help! Someone, please help me." In that fleeting moment, his grip loosened, his head turning toward the sound. It was the chance I needed. I drove my knee up sharply, catching him in the stomach. He doubled over, and I seized the moment. I scrambled to my feet and dashed for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the man behind me, his curses mingling with the woman's desperate cries for help. The upstairs hallway was shrouded in darkness, but a sliver of light beckoned from beneath one of the doors. I rushed toward it, throwing my shoulder against the wood, and the door burst open to reveal a scene that would linger in my mind for years to come. A woman was tied to a chair, her face bruised and tear-stained, her eyes widening in surprise and hope as she saw me. "Please," she gasped, "help me." Without a moment's hesitation, I rushed to her side, my fingers working frantically to untie the knots binding her wrists. Behind me, I could hear the man's heavy breathing as he reached the top of the stairs. "Get away from her!" he roared, his footsteps thundering down the hall. The last knot came loose just as he reached the doorway. The woman stood on shaky legs, clinging to me for support. "We have to jump," I said, gesturing to the window. It was our only chance. She nodded, understanding shining in her eyes, and we moved as one. One rushed towards the window as the man lunged for us, glass shattering around us as we crashed through. For a moment, we were falling, the cool night air whipping past us. Then we hit the ground hard, rolling across the overgrown lawn. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I staggered to my feet, pulling the woman up with me. We ran, not daring to look back, the sound of the man's enraged shouts fading behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached a gas station about a mile down. As we traveled down the road, the attendant's gaze fell upon our battered, bleeding forms, prompting an immediate call to the police. What ensued was a flurry of police statements, hospital visits, and media attention. The woman, known as Olivia, had been kidnapped by her ex-husband over a week prior, held captive under the delusion that shadowy figures were pursuing them both. Meanwhile, I found myself labeled a hero, though I felt anything but. I had merely been doing my job, delivering a pizza, caught in a web of chance, fate, or perhaps sheer folly. It was a stroke of fortune that had placed me precisely where I needed to be, allowing me to save Olivia's life. In the weeks that followed, as the story slipped from the headlines and life resumed its usual pace, I found it difficult to shake the haunting memories of that night. Each time I climbed into my car for a delivery, a flicker of fear would grip me. The sight of every shadowy house and the echo of every unfamiliar sound sent my heart racing. Yet, I persevered with the job, not only out of necessity but also because of something Olivia had whispered to me in the hospital. "You were my guardian angel," she had said, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "With a heart full of gratitude, you arrived just when I had nearly lost all hope." Those words lingered in my mind, a gentle reminder that even the simplest of acts, like delivering a pizza, can alter the course of someone's life in profound ways. It weighs heavily on me, this understanding that any ordinary call could transform into a matter of life or death. Yet, it serves as a poignant reminder of the unseen influence we wield over one another's lives, often without our awareness. So, I continue my journey, delivering pizzas to the doorsteps of strangers. And if I find myself a touch more vigilant at times, it is simply a reflection of this awareness. As I became a bit more attuned to my surroundings, I couldn't help but wonder if it was warranted. After all, one can never be too careful. A simple delivery could morph into something far more sinister. The moment my eyes caught the glint of metal beneath the driver's seat, a chill ran down my spine. This was no ordinary used car. What I had initially perceived as a fantastic deal had swiftly transformed into a harbinger of doom. I found myself ensnared in a web spun by those who would not think twice about taking a life for the secrets concealed within this vehicle. It all began so innocently. I had been diligently saving for months to purchase my very first car. As I scoured online listings and local dealerships in search of something reliable yet affordable, I stumbled upon an ad for a classic '69 Camaro, priced in a way that felt almost too good to be true. A sense of caution should have washed over me, but the photos were captivating, and the seller, a man named David, seemed friendly enough during our phone conversation. We arranged to meet at a garage on the outskirts of town, a location that felt a bit remote, yet David reassured me it was where he kept the car stored. As I pulled up, a twinge of excitement fluttered within me. Mustang sat gleaming in the sunlight, its cherry red paint job looking far better than I'd expected for the price. David was there waiting, a tall guy with an easy smile and a firm handshake. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" he said, patting the car's hood affectionately. I circled the vehicle, trying to appear knowledgeable even though I knew next to nothing about cars. "Looks great," I said, peering at the engine. "Why are you selling it so cheap?" David's smile faltered for just a second. "Ah, you know how it is. Times are tough." In a moment of urgency, the need for cash loomed large, and the car had been idle for too long, gathering dust. It seemed only right to let her go to someone who would cherish her. Everything felt reasonable, and after a brief test drive, where the car glided effortlessly, I was captivated. The paperwork was completed swiftly, cash exchanged, and just like that, I became the proud owner of a classic Mustang. As I drove home, a grin spread across my face, the engine's gentle purr resonating with joy, and the admiring glances from fellow drivers made me feel invincible. Yet, it was only upon arriving home that I began to truly reflect on my new acquisition. As I delved deeper into the car, an unexpected twist awaited me. While adjusting the driver's seat, my gaze fell upon a peculiar sight, a small tear in the upholstery. Something glimmered within, and my curiosity piqued. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. When I pulled it out, my heart nearly ceased its rhythm. It was a gun, a sleek and menacing pistol, carefully concealed within the seat cushion. A whirlwind of thoughts flooded my mind. What was this weapon doing hidden in the car? Had David simply forgotten about it? Or was there a darker secret lurking beneath the surface? There was something sinister unfolding, and before I could fully grasp it, the screech of tires pierced the night. I glanced out the window to see a black SUV come to a halt, two men in dark suits stepping out. They didn't resemble police officers, and the way they scanned the street sent a chill creeping down my spine. Instinctively, I ducked down, my heart pounding as I peered through the gap in the curtains. I watched as they approached my house, their hands hovering near their jackets, suggesting they were armed. A sharp knock on the door startled me. "Open up," a gruff voice called. "We know. You're in there." I stayed silent, my mind whirling. Who were these men? What did they want? What had I gotten myself into by buying this car? The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Last chance, open up or we're coming in." In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was going on, it was clear these men meant business, and I doubted they were here to welcome me to the neighborhood. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the back door. I could hear the men at the front, the sound of splintering would echoed ominously, a reminder of the urgency as they forced their way in. With trembling hands, I unlocked the back door and slipped into the cool evening air. I dashed toward the Mustang, fumbling with the keys, and just as I managed to open the door, shouts erupted from the house. They had discovered my absence. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of the men sprinting back to their SUV. The chase had begun. I sped through the neighborhood, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, the SUV hot on my tail. As I navigated the winding road, a sense of urgency propelled me forward. I had no clear destination, only the instinct to escape. The highway stretched ahead, and a sudden realization pierced through the chaos. The gun. It must be linked to whatever these men were after. My heart raced as I considered the possibility of something more concealed within the car. With one eye on the road and the other on the relentless SUV behind me, I reached down, my fingers exploring the tear in the seat. They brushed against a small, hard object wrapped in cloth. I pulled it out, nearly losing control of the vehicle as I recognized it for what it was: a USB. As I drove, the night air felt thick with tension. The innocuous-looking vehicle I was in somehow drawing the attention of men who were now intent on pursuing me through the shadowy streets. A sudden crack echoed as a bullet struck the rear of the car, causing me to duck instinctively. The facade of a peaceful resolution had vanished, and I realized they were now fully committed to their chase. I understood that I couldn't outrun them indefinitely. The Mustang, though swift, was no match for the weight and power of the SUV behind me. A plan was essential, and time was slipping away. Ahead, I spotted the exit leading into the old industrial district, a labyrinth of deserted warehouses and factories. It seemed to be my best chance to slip away into the night, to lose myself among the shadows and echoes of a forgotten place. As I took the exit sharply, the Mustang began to fishtail, and I fought to maintain control. The SUV loomed closely behind, its occupants likely reveling in the thrill of the chase, believing they had me cornered. Yet, I possessed a singular advantage: desperation. I maneuvered through the narrow streets, taking turns haphazardly, my thoughts racing as I prayed for no dead ends. The sounds of pursuit began to fade, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered within me. I might have evaded them, but as I rounded a corner, my heart plummeted. A chain-link fence stood before me, too tall to breach, blocking my escape. As the SUV loomed behind me, it sealed off any hope of escape. The men emerged, guns drawn, their faces alight with a sense of victory. "End of the line, kid," one of them taunted, demanding the drive in exchange for a swift resolution. I glanced at the USB in my hand, then at the weapons aimed in my direction. In that fleeting moment, I made a decision. With a roar, I revved the engine, the Mustang's powerful growl drowning out their shouts. A silent prayer escaped my lips as I pressed the accelerator, the car lunging forward toward the fence. Bullets ricocheted off the metal surrounding me, but I pressed on, unwavering in my resolve. As the Mustang thundered forward, it collided with the fence. A brief moment of resistance followed by the gratifying sound of metal surrendering. I surged onto an empty lot, leaving the bewildered men behind me. I didn't ease off the gas until I was miles away, my hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Eventually, I found a 24-hour diner and sank into a booth, ordering a coffee I had no intention of drinking. There, in the dim light, the USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, and I wrestled with the chaos of what had just unfolded. It was clear I had stumbled into something monumental, something that loomed larger than I could comprehend. In the stillness of the night, a sense of danger loomed over me, like a shadow creeping closer. The car, the gun, the drive. It all wove together into a tapestry of peril, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest. I pondered the thought of seeking help from the police, but doubt gnawed at me. Would they believe my tale? What if these men had their fingers in law enforcement's pie? A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was utterly alone in this dark web of intrigue. As dawn's first light began to break, I made a choice. Home was no longer a sanctuary. It had turned into a trap. Trust was a luxury I could not afford. Yet, the mystery of the drive called to me, and I knew I had to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. What was worth all this trouble? I paid for my untouched coffee and walked out to the Mustang. As I slid into the driver's seat, a mix of fear and determination washed over me. I didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was certain: my life would never be the same. The engine purred to life, and I pulled out onto the empty morning streets. Whatever came next, I was ready, or at least I hoped I was, because something whispered to me that this was just the beginning of a very dangerous journey. The moment I heard the muffled, as I stood there, listening to the whispers and watching the flickering lights in the seemingly deserted factory, I realized that my uneventful night shift had transformed into a struggle for survival. Little did I know, unraveling this hidden operation would test my limits and alter the course of my life forever. My name is William, and for the past 6 months, I have been a night security guard at the old Springbrook Industrial Park. While it may not be the most thrilling job, it pays the bills and allows me ample time to focus on my novel. Most nights, my greatest challenge, as I settled into the small security office with a thermos of coffee and my laptop, the atmosphere shifted on that chilly Tuesday night in October. The factory, a relic of the town's industrial past, loomed like a hulking shadow on the outskirts, silent and still, waiting for its fate, renovation or demolition. It was around 2 a.m. when the stillness deepened and the night began to weave its tales. I began my first round in the vast factory, a labyrinth of aged machinery and vacant storage rooms. My footsteps reverberated in the expansive space as I navigated through the building, flashlight illuminating my path. About halfway through my journey, I heard it, a subtle sound, like whispers drifting from the far end of the factory. At first, I dismissed it, thinking perhaps it was merely the wind sighing through the shattered windows or some stray creatures that had wandered in. Yet, as I approached, the sound sharpened, unmistakably voices, and undeniably human. As the minutes passed, I felt my heart begin to race. In the 6 months I had worked at the factory, I had never encountered anyone else during the night shift. Something was amiss. I turned off my flashlight, not wanting to draw attention to myself. As my eyes adjusted to the enveloping darkness, I noticed a faint glow seeping from beneath one of the old storage room doors. With cautious steps, I moved closer, straining to catch the low, urgent whispers within. They spoke of shipments and deadlines, revealing that this was no mere gathering of teenagers seeking a place to unwind. It was a moment thick with tension as I grasped my radio, prepared to summon help. Suddenly, the voices grew louder, approaching the door with an unsettling urgency. A wave of panic washed over me. There was no refuge in sight. The hallway stretched long and bare, offering no sanctuary. Just as the door creaked open, I made a hasty choice, slipping into a narrow alcove, pressing myself against the cool wall, and holding my breath. Two figures emerged, clad in dark attire and hefting duffel bags. "We need to move faster," one urged, urgency lacing his tone. "The boss wants this. The shipment will be out by morning," one said, his voice steady. "Relax," the other replied. "No one ever comes here. We've got all the time in the world." As they passed by my hiding spot, I caught a glimpse inside the room they had just vacated. My eyes widened in shock. The space was filled with tables covered in white powder, scales, and packaging materials. It was a drug operation right here in the old factory. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I call the police or try to gather more evidence? Just as I was debating my next move, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see one of the men staring directly at me. His face turned towards me, a blend of surprise and anger. "Hey!" he shouted. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't pause to hear more. I bolted, sprinting down the hallway as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, shouts echoed, accompanied by the heavy thud of footsteps in pursuit. My heart raced as I navigated the factory, desperately trying to recall the layout and find the quickest escape. Yet, in my panic, everything appeared foreign. I took a wrong turn and stumbled into the old production area, a vast expanse filled with rusting remnants of the past. Behind an old conveyor belt, I crouched low, trying to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. The voices of the men searching for me echoed ominously off the high ceilings. "He's got to be the night guard," one of them said, urgency lacing his tone. "Find him. We can't let him get out of here." My heart raced as I realized I needed to call for help. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, only to be met with the frustrating truth. There was no signal. The thick factory walls had always been a barrier to reception. I knew I had to find a way outside to call for help. Just as I began to plot my next move, a hand reached out. As I felt a hand grip my shoulder, I turned swiftly to confront one of the men. His face contorted in a menacing snarl. "Got you," he growled. Acting purely on instinct, I swung my flashlight, the beam connecting with the side of his head. He stumbled back, cursing, and I took off running once more. The exit sign glimmered faintly in the distance, a beacon of hope. But as I sprinted toward it, more figures emerged from the shadows, closing in around me. "Nowhere to run now, buddy," one of them taunted, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You should have minded your own business." I backed away, my eyes darting around, searching for an escape. In a moment of desperation, I spotted it, the old freight elevator. Without a second thought, I lunged for the button, my heart racing as I prayed it would still function. To my astonishment, the doors creaked open, and I dove inside just as the men reached me, their angry shouts echoing in the air. The doors closed with a heavy thud, sealing me away from their fury. The elevator groaned to life, ascending toward the roof, and as I caught my breath, a chilling realization washed over me. I had only gained a fleeting moment of safety. They would be waiting when the doors opened again. I needed a plan. The elevator shuddered to a stop, and I steeled myself for what lay ahead. As the doors creaked open, a chill from the night air enveloped me. I found myself on the roof, the town sprawling beneath, its lights flickering like distant stars. The sounds of shouts and hurried footsteps echoed from the stairwell. They were drawing near. I rushed to the edge, searching for an escape, and that's when I spotted it. The old fire escape, rusted yet still standing. Without a moment's pause, I swung myself over the edge and onto the metal stairs. They groaned softly under my weight, but they held firm. I began my descent, moving as swiftly as caution would allow. Just as I reached the halfway point, voices echoed above me, a reminder that they had discovered the fire escape. I glanced down. The ground seemed a world away, yet I had no other option. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I leaped. The impact was jarring, pain radiating through my legs, but the rush of adrenaline propelled me forward. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted toward the fence encircling the factory grounds. Behind me, shouts and footsteps grew louder, urgency fueling my flight. My lungs screamed for air, and my legs felt heavy as lead, but I pressed on. The fence loomed ahead, its barbed wire a daunting barrier, yet it felt like the only path to freedom. It stood 100 feet tall, an imposing barrier, but then I noticed it, a small gap where the fence had pulled away from the post. It was a tight squeeze, yet it was my only chance. I threw myself at it, feeling the metal scratch and tear at my clothes as I wriggled through. At last, I was free. I ran across the empty lot, not stopping until I reached the main road. There, under the soft glow of a streetlight, I finally pulled out my phone. This time, there was a signal. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. "Please," I gasped as soon as the operator answered. "I need help. There's a drug operation at..." In the shadows of the old Springbrook Industrial Park, a sense of urgency enveloped me. The hours that followed were a haze, filled with the wail of police sirens and the piercing glow of flashing lights. Stone-faced detectives surrounded me, their questions echoing in the stillness. A trip to the hospital awaited, where they would tend to my injuries. As dawn broke, the factory was swarmed, the drug operation dismantled, and several taken into custody. Sitting in the police station, recounting my tale for what felt like the 100th time, I couldn't shake the thought of how the night might have unfolded differently. If only I had been a heartbeat slower, if only the darkness had held me just a moment longer. The elevator had failed, and if the fence had remained whole, perhaps I wouldn't have escaped with my life. The detectives praised me, calling me a hero for dismantling one of the largest drug operations in the state. Yet I felt anything but heroic. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me, my body ached, and the shadows of trauma lingered in my mind. As I finally stepped out of the station and into the bright morning sunlight, a realization washed over me. My life would never return to what it once was. The quiet existence I had as a night watchman was now a distant memory, shattered by the events that had unfolded. With each step toward home, I felt the remnants of that simple life slip further away. Though my body ached, my spirit remained unbroken. Alongside the pain, there was a flicker of pride, a sense of accomplishment. I had faced true danger and emerged on the other side, knowing I had made a difference. Whatever lay ahead, I felt ready to confront it. After all, how many aspiring novelists get to live through their own thriller? But the moment I caught sight of his eyes glinting in the flickering porch light, a chill ran down my spine. I realized then that I had made a grave mistake. What I had thought was a refuge from the storm had transformed into a trap, and I was the unsuspecting prey. It had been a long day on the road. As I embarked on my cross-country drive, pursuing a job opportunity in California that held the promise of transformation, the first 2 days unfolded under a flawless sky. However, upon entering Arizona, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Dark clouds gathered ominously, unleashing a torrential downpour that was unlike anything I had ever encountered. The rain fell in sheets, obscuring my vision to just a few feet ahead. I eased my speed to a crawl, my knuckles turning white on the steering wheel as I focused intently on the road before me. That's when it happened. A deafening crack of thunder startled me, and I jerked the wheel. My old Honda skidded on the wet asphalt, spinning once before coming to a stop on the shoulder. When I tried to restart it, the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," I muttered, turning the key again and again, but nothing happened. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, in a storm that showed no signs of letting up. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, I was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by desert and scrubland. As I sat there, pondering my next move, a faint light flickered in the distance. Hope ignited within me. Perhaps it was a gas station or a rest stop, a refuge where I could wait out the storm and call for help. With determination, I grabbed my backpack, took a deep breath, and stepped into the rain. The wind howled, nearly knocking me off my feet, and within moments, I was drenched to the bone. Yet, I pressed on, my gaze fixed on that distant glow. As I drew nearer, I discovered it was not a gas station, but an old house, 2 stories of weathered wood, standing resilient against the storm. Peeling paint adorned the old house, yet the porch light shone brightly, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. I paused at the bottom of the steps, contemplating the choice before me. Knocking on a stranger's door in the dead of night felt daunting, but the thought of remaining in my broken-down car or attempting to walk to the next town was even less appealing. With a deep breath, I ascended the steps and rapped my knuckles against the wood. For a long moment, silence enveloped me, and just as I was about to knock again, I heard a shuffling sound from within. The door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s, his skin weathered and his dark eyes sharp. "Can I help you?" he inquired, his voice steady and calm. With a voice steady yet soft, I recounted my predicament, raising my voice just enough to pierce through the fierce wind that howled outside. "I apologize for intruding, but my car has broken down, and I noticed your light. May I use your phone to call for assistance?" The man regarded me for a moment, his face a mask of contemplation, before he finally nodded slowly. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. A wave of relief washed over me as I crossed the threshold. The warmth and dryness of the house enveloped me, though a hint of mustiness lingered in the air. Old newspapers and books were piled high, and the furniture bore the weight of time, as if it had not been updated in ages. In the 1970s, the phones in the kitchen held a certain charm. The man guiding me through the cluttered living room introduced himself as George. "I'm George," he said, and I replied, "Emily, thank you so much for this." However, as we entered the kitchen, a wave of unease washed over me. The phone on the wall was an ancient rotary model, its cord frayed and yellowed with age. George must have noticed my reaction. "It still works," he reassured me, "but the lines might be down because of the storm. Why don't you get dried off and wait it out? I'm sure it'll pass soon." I hesitated, every instinct urging me to be cautious. They were urging me to venture out into the tempest, rather than remain in this peculiar abode with its enigmatic inhabitant. Another rumble of thunder startled me, and I understood that my options were dwindling. "That would be great," I said, mustering a smile. George nodded and vanished upstairs, only to return shortly with a towel and some garments. "These belong to my daughter," he explained softly, "but she doesn't live here anymore." I expressed my gratitude as he guided me to a small bathroom where I could change. As I removed my drenched attire, an unsettling sensation lingered in the air, one that I couldn't quite shake off. Something felt amiss. Perhaps it was the way George's gaze had lingered on me just a moment too long, or the peculiar tone he used when speaking of his daughter. I quickly turned and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I heard it. A thump from upstairs, followed by what seemed to be a muffled cry. My heart began to race. "George!" I called out, but there was no answer. Against my better judgment, I found myself moving toward the stairs. The sound of crying came again. Definitely human, definitely in distress. I ascended the stairs slowly, my heart pounding so loudly that I feared George could hear it too. At the end of a long hallway, several closed doors stood silent. Yet, from the one at the far end, a sound beckoned me closer. I approached with caution, straining to listen, and indeed, there was someone inside. My hand trembled as it reached for the doorknob, just as I was about to turn it. Suddenly, a hand gripped my shoulder, and I spun around to find George. His eyes, once warm, now glinted with a cold intensity. Now, he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Didn't anyone ever tell you it's rude to snoop in other people's houses?" I tried to respond, but the weight of his gaze held me in place. To retreat, yet he held me tightly.
I'm sorry, I stammered.
I heard a noise. George's grip grew firmer. "You shouldn't have come up here, Emily. You really shouldn't have." In that moment, a chill ran down my spine. I realized I was in deep trouble. I did the only thing that came to mind. I brought my knee up sharply, catching George in the groin. He doubled over, cursing, and I seized my chance to flee. I raced down the stairs, the sound of George's heavy footsteps echoing behind me. I reached the front door and yanked it open, plunging back into the storm. The rain continued to pour in sheets, but fear propelled me onward, my feet slipping and sliding through the mud as I ran, the sound of footsteps echoing ominously behind me. Time lost its grip in the enveloping darkness and relentless rain. Yet, eventually, I caught sight of lights ahead, real lights, the welcoming glow of a town. As I stumbled onto the main street, I spotted a police car parked outside a diner. I rushed toward it, waving my arms in desperation. The officer emerged, startled by my disheveled state. Between gasping breaths, I recounted the harrowing events, and soon, more police were summoned, a whole team preparing to venture into the night. George's house held secrets that sent shivers down my spine. For years, he had been luring stranded motorists, capturing them in his web of darkness. When they finally uncovered the truth, 3 souls were found locked away in the upstairs rooms, one of whom was a young woman he referred to as his daughter. In the days that followed, as I recounted my experiences and grappled with the reality of it all, a haunting thought lingered in my mind. How narrowly I had escaped becoming just another of George's victims. Had I not heard that desperate cry, had I not, in the quiet aftermath of that harrowing experience, I found myself transformed. Caution became my companion, and I learned to see the shadows that often hide behind innocent smiles. Yet, within that darkness, I discovered a flicker of my own strength, a resilience that emerged when I needed it most. Eventually, I journeyed to California, though the job I had sought had slipped away like sand through my fingers. Instead, I uncovered a new calling, a purpose that filled the void. I began to volunteer with organizations dedicated to aiding victims of kidnapping and abuse, sharing my story as a beacon of hope to guide others towards safety. Now, as I drive through the streets, I carry with me the weight of those lessons learned, a reminder of the shadows that linger and the light that can emerge from them. On those dark nights or during tempestuous weather, my mind drifts back to that fateful evening in Arizona. I recall George's house, its inviting porch light casting a warm glow that almost beckoned me into peril. It serves as a reminder that the most treacherous of predators often wear the guise of innocence. Yet, amidst these thoughts, I find solace in my own strength. That night, which could have marked the conclusion of my tale, instead unfolded into a new chapter, one where I emerged stronger, wiser, and committed to guiding others away from similar snares. As I drove through the darkness, the storm raging around me, a distant light flickered, beckoning me with the promise of safety. But in that moment, a shiver ran down my spine, reminding me that sometimes the tempest outside is far less menacing than what lurks behind a seemingly welcoming glow. The instant I caught sight of the knife's glimmer in his hand, the truth settled in my gut. The man who had offered refuge was not a guardian but a hunter, and I had unwittingly stepped into his den. What had begun as a simple day hike, a remedy for my work-induced stress, had taken a chilling turn into the unknown. As I ventured into the embrace of nature, seeking solace in the trails of the nearby national forest, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The crisp Saturday morning air filled my lungs as I set out, my backpack equipped with water, trail mix, and a first aid kit. The initial hours unfolded like a gentle dream, the fresh air, the melodic chirping of birds, and the satisfying crunch of leaves beneath my boots weaving a tapestry of tranquility that eased the tension I had been holding onto for weeks. Yet, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, an unsettling shift began to creep into my peaceful journey, hinting that perhaps not all was as it seemed. I came to understand that I had misjudged the challenge of the trail. What was meant to be a moderate hike transformed into a far more demanding journey. As clouds gathered, they ushered in an unusual chill, hinting at the possibility of rain. I made the decision to turn back, but in my rush I must have taken a wrong turn. Suddenly, the landmarks that once guided me became strangers. I attempted to retrace my steps, yet each effort seemed to lead me further astray. As the light began to wane and the temperature dropped, a sense of unease crept in. I found myself lost, and I reached for my phone, hoping for a glimmer of reassurance. As I relied on the GPS, I quickly discovered the absence of a signal, a reminder of my isolation. Miles away from the nearest cell tower, enveloped by a dense forest and steep hills that thwarted any chance of communication. As darkness descended, the forest transformed, taking on an unsettling aura. Each snapping twig sent a jolt through me, and every shadow seemed to conceal an unseen menace. Cold, weary, and increasingly desperate, I suddenly spotted it, a faint light flickering through the trees. A surge of hope coursed through me. Perhaps it was a ranger station or a campground. I began to move toward it, my pace quickening despite the weight of my exhaustion. As I drew nearer, the silhouette of a cabin emerged from the shadows, a rustic structure of weathered wood and a tin roof. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, and a single window glowed with a warm light, inviting me like a beacon in the enveloping darkness. I paused at the edge of the small clearing, contemplating the choice before me. Knocking on a stranger's door in the dead of night, in such an isolated place, felt perilous. Yet, the thought of spending the night lost in the increasingly cold forest was equally daunting. With a deep breath, I stepped forward and raised my hand to the door, my knock echoing softly in the stillness. Almost immediately, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s, his weathered face framed by sharp blue eyes. He took a moment to assess my disheveled appearance. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gruff yet not unkind. I nodded, sharing my predicament, and to my relief, his expression softened. "Can't leave you out here to freeze," he said, stepping aside. "Come on in. Name's Robert." "Thanks," I replied, gratitude washing over me as I entered the warm cabin.
I'm David.
I really appreciate this. The interior was snug and cluttered, a comforting refuge from the chill outside. Every surface was adorned with books, tools, and what appeared to be animal pelts. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, filling the space with warmth and the comforting scent of wood smoke. "Sit," Robert said, gesturing to a worn armchair. "I'll make some coffee to warm you up." As he moved to the small kitchenette, I sank into the chair, the events of the day catching up with me. I was safe. I would be able to get directions back to my car in the morning. Everything was going to be okay. Yet, as I watched Robert prepare the coffee, a nagging feeling began to stir within me. Perhaps it was the way his eyes flickered towards me or the tautness in his shoulders that hinted at something amiss. To ease the growing tension, I asked, "Do you live out here full-time?" Robert grunted in response, affirming, "Going on 30 years now. Don't much care for people or their noise." I ventured, "Must get lonely." He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, I get visitors now and then," he said, a smile curling his lips that never quite reached his eyes. "Folks like you who lose their way." The way he said it wrapped around me like a cold fog. My spine tingled as I stood up, suddenly feeling the urge to create some distance between us. Perhaps it was time for me to leave. "If you could just point me in the direction of the main trail," I began, but Robert interrupted, his voice hardening. That's when I noticed it, the knife in his hand, its blade glinting in the firelight. My heart raced as I scanned the room, desperately searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. But Robert stood between me and the only door, and the windows looked small and likely nailed shut. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. As I asked, I focused on maintaining a steady voice. Robert's smile grew wider, revealing his yellowed teeth. "Company," he said simply. "It does get so lonely out here." He took a step closer, the knife hanging loosely at his side. I backed up until I felt the cold wall behind me, my mind racing as I tried to recall the self-defense class I had taken years ago. "Look," I said, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. "You don't have to do this. I won't tell anyone I was here. Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." Robert's laughter rang out, a harsh sound that echoed in the stillness of the night. In the small cabin, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Oh, I'm not worried about you telling anyone," he said, his voice steady. "No one would believe you anyway, and even if they did, they'd never find this place, just like they never found the others." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air, a chilling reminder of those who had come before. How many hikers had wandered into this cabin, seeking refuge, only to vanish without a trace. As Robert took another step forward, a sense of urgency ignited within me. I feinted to the left, then dove right, aiming for the fireplace. My hand closed around a poker just as Robert crashed into me, and the world around us blurred into chaos. We found ourselves on the floor, grappling and rolling across the rough wooden planks. A knife flashed, and I felt a sharp pain slice through my arm, but the rush of adrenaline pushed me onward. I swung the poker with all my might, striking Robert on the side of the head. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for me to escape. I dashed toward the door, fumbling with the latch as I heard Robert rising behind me. The door burst open, and I plunged into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't hesitate. I ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping at me as I fled into the darkness. My feet stumbled over the gnarled roots, each step a reminder of the lurking danger behind me. Robert's furious shouts sliced through the stillness of the night, crashing through the underbrush like a storm. I pushed myself to run faster than I ever thought possible, fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins, propelling me into the unknown. Time lost its grip as I raced through the darkness, the terror wrapping around me like a shroud. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit began to fade, replaced by the familiar whispers of the forest at night. I slowed to a walk, my lungs burning and my legs feeling like lead, the weight of the night settling in. Once again, I found myself lost, but this time, it felt like the least of my worries. Injured and exhausted, I was being pursued by a madman who knew these woods far better than I ever could. As the adrenaline began to fade, the pain in my arm intensified, and I glanced down to see my sleeve drenched in blood. I knew I needed to stop and tend to the wound, yet the fear of remaining in one place for too long held me back. Just as despair threatened to take hold, a sound pierced the stillness and made my heart race, the gentle rush of running water. A stream or river could be my way out of this nightmare. In the depths of the forest, or perhaps along a winding trail, I moved cautiously, attuned to the sounds around me. The sky began to brighten, the first whispers of dawn filtering through the trees. Just ahead, a small river appeared, its waters shimmering with the soft morning light. A wave of relief washed over me, yet I remained vigilant. I followed the river, keeping close to the bank where the ground was more forgiving. After what seemed like an eternity, a sound reached my ears, one that brought tears to my eyes. The distant hum of traffic quickened my pace. Pace Hope gave me a second wind, and at last, I broke through the tree line to find a highway stretching out before me. I flagged down the first car I saw, likely appearing like a madman with my torn clothes and bloodied arm. The elderly couple in the car were alarmed at first, but after hearing my tale, they quickly offered to drive me to the nearest hospital. As we drove away from the forest, I couldn't help but glance back, wondering if Robert was still out there, waiting for his next victim. At the hospital, I recounted my story to the police. Initially, they were filled with doubt, but the marks of my injuries and the unmistakable fear in my eyes urged them to look deeper. Yet, Robert and his cabin seemed to have slipped away, swallowed by the very forest itself. As the weeks turned into months, I began to heal from both my physical and emotional scars, yet my mind remained haunted by the thought of how narrowly I had escaped becoming just another lost hiker, another enigma for others to unravel. This ordeal transformed me. It instilled a sense of caution within me, yet it also deepened my appreciation for the fragile beauty of life. I still venture into the woods from time to time, but never alone. I always ensure that someone knows precisely where I'm headed and when I plan to return. I've learned through experience that sometimes the most dangerous predators disguise themselves as helpers. In the wilderness, the distinction between savior and monster can be hauntingly blurred.